Welcome everybody to another board meeting. At the first part of the meeting we're going to discuss the Thornton report into Morecambe Bay. But I think, can we just kill off, is everyone happy with the minutes of the last meeting?
Sorry, David, one tiny thing, but I think on page 7, paragraph 38, it talks about it's the National Information Governance Committee, and it says I sought confirmation there was sufficient user voice. Actually, I think it was Kay who made that request, not me.
Is that right, Kay? You? Okay. All right, Claire. Thanks. Thanks, Anna. Anyone else? Any else? Minutes, all right? Right, thank you. Can we take the matters arising as we go through the agenda? I think they're all covered, actually, in the agenda. If for some reason one isn't at the end, we'll pick it up at the end. And so go straight into the Grant Thornton report, which everyone has had a copy of. Before we have the discussion, we've asked Peter Steele, who is our solicitor from Bevan, Britain, who's advised us on the how we should handle the report and the publication of the report. Do you just want to give us a bit of advice before we have the public discussion?
Thank you. Good morning. As David said, I'm a solicitor and I've been advising CQC on a number of the aspects of the investigation process and the report, but I should emphasise, of course, that I haven't had any input into the report itself. It's the independent work of Grant Thornton. As you will have seen, the report is anonymised. There are two anonymisation schemes. In certain parts of the report, people are referred to only by their job title. In the part of the report that may be considered more sensitive, there is a strict anonymisation scheme. The identities of some of the people referred to in the report by either the job titles or other descriptors may of course be known to people around this table. My advice to the board is that for very good reasons, the report has been drafted in that way to prevent or mitigate the possibility of claims against CQC. If members of the board were to refer to people by name, of course, that might fill in the blanks, allowing a claim or some challenge to the report. And my advice would be, therefore, that the board should adopt the same anonymisation scheme as has been set out in the report in discussing it. I hope that makes sense. Of course, if there's anything else I can help with, please do say.
Peter, I just want you to be absolutely clear and confirm, that there has been no involvement by us, you, or anyone else in trying to alter the views of the Grant Thornton report. I just want to be absolutely clear that the reason for the delay in the report was to make it publishable.
Indeed,
Okay.
And I'm happy to give that confirmation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I think there's a precursor which I'd quite like to understand, which is I understand that a report has been anonymised, and that it would. Actually, being relatively new to the board, I'm not in a position to name any of the individuals, so it doesn't apply. But I understand that because the report is anonymised, it's appropriate for us to continue to talk in those terms. But I think there's a question which some people might want to know the answer to, and which I would find helpful too, which is why it was necessary to anonymise it. And I think that I suspect that probably rests on the difference between a report of this sort and something like the Francis report, which has a different status in law and therefore a different position in terms of its ability to name names rather than keep names anonymous. And I would find it helpful if you could explain that for us, and I'm sure other people would like to know the answer too.
Well, exactly that. There is, in a report of this nature, still the possibility that individuals named might make claims for defamation, or that their data protection rights have been breached, and in order to prevent that possibility as far as is possible, the decision was taken by the authors of the report to anonymise names.
And the difference with the Francis report was that was set up under the Inquiries Act. It was a different.
Indeed, and they have statutory powers to compel people to give evidence and to publish their reports. This has all been done on a voluntary basis, of course, with in all instances the voluntary participation of those who were interviewed, and as I say, it still in these circumstances allows the possibility of claims against CQC or against Grant Thornton for breach of data protection rights or in defamation.
David, I understand that a public inquiry properly convened will have, is it called absolute privilege?
I think probably qualified privilege.
In which case, why does this report not have qualified privilege too?
Well, it may benefit from qualified privilege, but having considered all the circumstances, both Grant Thornton and I, in advising CQC, take the view that it would be the safest course. It would have been the safest course to anonymise the names of those who may be criticised in the report.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not in a position to be able to debate the legalities of this, but I found the report very frustrating because it wasn't clear, even though I've been on the board for a few years, it wasn't clear to me who some of these people were. And at some point, I think we do clearly as a board need to discuss who they are and what actually happened. We'll come on to that in a minute. So it'd be helpful to understand how we're going to do that, even if we don't do it today.
Thank you, Peter. David.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So what I intend to do now is present the report in some detail. I'll take board members through the report against its content, and I'll preface those remarks and then make some concluding remarks about what the potential next steps are, and I hope that allows the board to debate the issues that are set out in the report, Chair. So when I arrived in my role as Chief Executive of CQC at the end of January last year, there was an outstanding complaint raised by board member Kay Sheldon about the decision making in relation to UHMB, and that contained the allegation that there was a cover-up. As the incoming Chief Executive and Accounting Officer, I wasn't prepared to let that stand at the beginning of my role with CQC, and therefore discussed with the then Chair commissioning an independent investigation of our decision making in relation to UHMB. As a result of that, Grant Thornton were commissioned to conduct an independent review of the decision making and engagement of CQC with University Hospital Morecambe NHS Foundation Trust, and that was from the beginning of CQC's inception in 2009 through to the present day. It was always intended that that report would be independent, and it was always the intention that that report would be made public by it being presented to a board meeting which was held in public session, and therefore the report will be deemed to be published. In October of last year, I received a complaint from the father of one of the children that had died at UHMB, and at his request, we agreed to extend the terms of reference of the Grant Thornton review to consider his complaint. And from October, that decision was taken and Grant Thornton began to carry out an investigation of those 3 issues that were raised by the father, the complainant. I think what this report demonstrates, Chair, is that we did not, in CQC, get our management of our relationship and our decisions with UHMB right. I think we have let people who should have had confidence in our judgments and our decisions down. And as Chief Inspector of CQC, I apologise for this to the people concerned. I did this on Monday with a complainant, and I did it. Also spoke to Kay on Monday as well. We, the new executive team, and I know David, who's also apologised, are determined that we should put this right. And the strategy and our consultation document begins that process of addressing the concerns which were raised. There are, as you know, new board members and new executive members are being appointed to the organisation. And we are, and I am, determined that we should conduct ourselves in an open and transparent way, demonstrating those public sector values of openness, transparency and integrity. What I'm going to do now, Chair, if I may, is just present the report in what I think are 3 chunks. The first chunk is to deal with the 3 issues from what the report refers to as the complainant, the father of the child that died. I'll then proceed to the 11 questions that was raised by our board member and is referred to in the report as the whistleblower. And then I'll deal with the internal investigation into CQC and go through that.
Sorry, Dave, just in the interest of accuracy, I heard you say you came here at the end of January, when I think you meant to say July.
Thank you,
in
Chair.
your first statement.
I did come at the end of July, thank you. Thank you for that. So if I can turn to the 3 issues raised by the complainant. The first one was, did CQC make its own independent decision about the action to take following an investigation case referral from CQC's North West Regional Team in 2009, which concerned 5 serious untoward incidents that occurred at University Hospitals of Morecambe Bay Maternity Services in 2008, one of which involved the death of a named baby. And to summarise the conclusion in the report, this is content, the relevant pages in the report that colleagues have got in front of them is 34 to 69 and then 286 to 287. And I summarise the conclusions, but it, in this way. The decision not to investigate at the time was a missed opportunity by CQC, but CQC's decision was independent and there was no evidence of any attempt to interfere with the decision-making process. In terms of the second issue that was raised, which was concerning the nature of CQC's involvement with the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman Service, and what evidence is there regarding that the claim that CQC's former Chief Executive attempted to influence the PHSO not to investigate a complaint at UHMB maternity services. And again, this is addressed on 70 to 91 and 287 to 288. And the summary of the conclusion is that there was nothing improper in the contact between CQC and PHSO or any evidence that CQC sought to influence PHSO. It was an independent decision that was made by both PHSO and CQC. I'll come back to this later, it's referred to later, Chair. The third issue that was raised was having had concerns about maternity services in 2009, on what basis did CQC subsequently register the trust without conditions in 2010? And again, this is dealt with on 92 to 142 and 288 to 291. And again, to summarise the conclusion, information was available at the time that should have caused CQC to reflect on whether there was a need to register UHMB with conditions. However, neither the Trust, through the Fielding Report, nor the PCT informed CQC in a timely way about these specific pieces of work or the emerging findings. CQC accepted that the concerns they were aware were being addressed, and I think they conclude that CQC was insufficiently sceptical and was too accepting of the assurances given and relied too heavily on unverified data and information. The decision to register UHMB without conditions was not of a result of pressure to arrive at this conclusion. CQC's registration of UHMB without compliance conditions was an error. I agree with that. So there were the three issues raised by what the report refers to as a complainant. If I could now come to the 11 issues that are referred to in the report by the whistleblower, by Kay as a board member. The 11 questions, and these are set out in the report from 144 onwards. The first question was, why did CQC not identify any of the serious issues with the Trust's maternity services that were clearly around in July 2010? And a summary of the conclusions of the report were that CQC should have identified the concerns that were identified in the Fielding report. This report was finalised in August 2010 and by the PCT in both February 2010 and May 2010. UHMB did not share this information with CQC at the relevant time, and when CQC learnt of it, there was a significant delay before obtaining the report. CQC then failed to follow up after learning that North Lancashire PCT's concerns in June 2010, and there was a lack of involvement by specialists in CQC's June 2010 inspection. Second question raised of the 11 was what action follow-up occurred after the compliance review of Lancaster Royal Infirmary in April 2011. This is 153 to 156 and 292. Following this review, and this didn't include maternity services because there was an inquest taking place into the death of one of the babies, that review did result in some minor and moderate concerns being listed. Following that, though, the Trust submitted an action plan and CQC held monthly telephone reviews with the Director of Nursing at UHMB, and an inspection into maternity services at UHMB was conducted between the 18th and the 20th of July 2011, and that resulted in a warning notice being issued in September 2011. But by this time, Gold Command had been instituted by the SHA. So there was evidence at the time that UHMB was failing in the provision and quality and safety of care. So there was follow-up by a number of different agencies at that time. The third question was, when was the warning notice following the compliance review of maternity services in 2011 served, and why were there two different versions? This is 157 to 161 and 292. The difference between the reports is that one has the inclusion of a reference to enforcement action taken and one didn't. The fact that there were two reports on the website is concluded by the review as being an inadvertent error. Fourth question was, why was there no follow-up date or update after this review? This is the 2011 maternity review that led to the 2011 warning notice, 162 to 172, 292. A follow-up review was planned for December 2011, but this did not occur. At the time, Gold Command and a diagnostic review was in place. There was a decision made by CQC at the time that the inspection would be conducted once this additional support was withdrawn, so that it could more fully assess the sustainability of any changes being made. CQC's policy at the time was not clear as to whether a follow-up inspection was required following the deadline for compliance set out in a warning notice. CQC apparently carried out an inspection at Furness General Hospital on the 1st of October, Saturday the 1st of October, but no records are found in relation to this. On the 27th of October, UHMB was discussed at the Risk and Escalation Committee, and on the 21st of November, the Trust submitted an action plan following the warning notice. This is the September warning notice. On the 6th of December, CQC and Monitor held a risk summit, and on the 21st of December, a visit was undertaken to A&E at the Royal Lancaster. The fifth issue, Chair, is does a warning notice and other regulatory actions stay in place until CQC undertakes a follow-up visit, and if so, is this safe for the public and fair to the provider? 173 to 177 and 293. CQC did follow up. Other activity was being undertaken given the concerns that had come to light. Just a note here that a warning notice is a warning. It doesn't impose restrictions to be lifted or restrictions that could lapse. However, CQC would need to conduct a follow-up for further reports to be issued, for the website to be updated, for that to go into, in a sense, into the public domain. The sixth question, why are there so many serious and different issues in the reports commissioned by Monitor, especially the diagnostic review and the review into outpatient follow-ups that relate directly to patient care and experience and are not purely governance issues? This is covered in 178 to 184 and 294 to 295. And they summarise the conclusions of the review, that reviews conducted by Monitor did have a governance focus, and there was a joint decision that involved CQC that Monitor should commission these reviews, but they also covered areas under CQC's remit. My view, Chair, is that I fully understand why Monitor could not trust the judgments that we were expressing at the time. Question 7, why was an investigation launched into this case? This is into Morecambe, UHMB, and at this time especially, as there seemed to be other providers with similar or worse situations where an investigation had not been launched. Are we, i.e. CQC, transparent in being able to justify the decision around an investigation? This is 185 to 192 and 295, and the summary of the Grant Thornton conclusion is that questions whether CQC should have launched an investigation sooner arise. Decisions to investigate was an independent one, but there was a lack of clarity as to why it was made at the time rather than previously. And although the terms of reference for the investigation and press release announcing its launch aided transparency, more could have been done. And of course, the board have considered the report from Deloitte in relation to this, and we've made changes subsequently. Question 8. Why is a warning notice served in September 2011 concerning maternity services referred to in the terms of reference in the investigation? This is 193 onwards and 296 onwards. And the summary is that warning notices was referred to by way of providing background context. 9. What triggered the compliance review at Lancaster Royal Infirmary in February 2012? Why was a warning notice issued on staffing at this point? And are we, CQC, transparent in being able to demonstrate the appropriateness of this course of action? This is 2001, page 201 and 297 onwards. The summary of the conclusion is that the 2012 compliance review was triggered by concerns arising from CQC's A&E investigation at UHMB. The warning notice on staffing related to A&E in December 2011 and not to the February inspection. Grant Thornton concluded that the delay in publishing the warning notice does not assist in demonstrating transparency, is a phrase that they used, especially as the deadline for complying with the warning notice had passed long before that report was published. Question 10. Why were 2 further warning notices issued on outcomes 1 and 4, which were found compliant just a couple of weeks previously in March 2012? This is page 205 to 207 and 297 onwards. Summary of the conclusions are that 2 warning notices were issued in February 2012, not in March. Both the December and the February reviews included outcomes 1 and 4 in relation to A&E and UHMB, but they looked at different hospital sites. In December it was the Royal Lancaster and Furness General in February. The 11th question was, can we demonstrate consistency and transparency and fairness in our regulatory judgments and actions throughout this period, and how would we, CQC, demonstrate that we have followed our enforcement policy? 208 and 298 in the report itself. There were a number of weaknesses in the actions and decisions taken by CQC and in the systems and processes. The findings demonstrate the importance of coordination and coherence, The context was difficult and challenging given the size of the task. Staff acted in good faith. So that's how those 11 questions have been addressed in the Grant Thornton report. What they then go on to address in part 3A of the report, this is page 210 onwards, is the allegations of a cover-up that arose from those 11 questions. And in this report, and I draw attention, I think this is 226 onwards, paragraphs 599 onwards, that the matters to conclude the report point to organisational failings, but they conclude the facts of the case examined do not prove, in our view, that some form of cover-up existed. And that's how they conclude that particular section. But in the course of their investigation, they discovered an internal review. And this is dealt with in the report on page 230 onwards. This is part 3B of the report. In the latter part of 2011, an internal review was commissioned within CQC to identify the lessons learned. That report, as this section identified failures and weaknesses in the regulatory systems and processes and decision making. In 6.8 and 6.10, it draws attention to the fact that assurances were taken from others, from the SHA. Insufficient validation was given to the evidence that was identified by others. The report by Fielding was known at an early stage in January 2010 to some members of CQC. I think it's fair to conclude that they did not identify the significance of that report, and we didn't formally receive the report until August of 2010. What the investigation reveals is, as I've said, weaknesses and failures in the decision making. This report was considered at a meeting, an internal meeting, and the independent report, the Grant Thornton report, identifies that an instruction was given to delete the report, and the report concludes that this can be characterised as a cover-up, and those conclusions are set out in paragraphs 6251 to 6254. Part 4 of the review, which is page 280 onwards, deals with the existence of the Fielding review and the precise chronology of who knew what about that review and at what time and what weight was given. I don't intend to summarise any more about that, Chair. I think that's set out in the report, and I've already covered the significance of the Fielding review, both from UHMB's perspective and also the implication for the judgments that we were able to make. So by way of conclusion, Chair, I think this report does demonstrate that CQC then did not get this right, that we did let down people who should have had the confidence and trust in our judgment. We have apologised for that. We let down individuals, and both the complainant and the whistleblower have identified these concerns. I think it is important that we set out this report, we discharge our commitment to publish it, and we demonstrate that we are being open and transparent in the way that we are responding. Our actions by way of response are set out in our strategy and are set out in the consultation document that we published on Monday of this week. I think in addition to that, Chair, we probably should make an undertaking from this morning to give a commitment to write to ministers within the next 2 months, setting out the action that we have taken over the past 6 months to begin to put right these failures and weaknesses which are identified in the report, and continue to account for the activity that we're taking, and thus demonstrate our openness in taking it forward. I'm happy to answer any questions that board members might have.
Okay, thank you. Kay, do you want to start?
Okay. The first thing I just want to put on record is that obviously I'm the whistleblower in the report. And I just want to put it on the record that I raised the issues internally first. I then raised them with the Department of Health. I then raised them with the Permanent Secretary, and I also raised them with the Secretary of State for Health. Now, that's the process that non-execs are supposed to follow, and I followed that to the T, and there's evidence to support that before I decided to make a whistleblowing disclosure to the Daily Telegraph. And I have no regrets whatsoever, but I would like to say I think I should have been listened to at every stage, and I should not have had to go to the lengths that I went to. And the second thing I want to say is because I had no choice but to make a whistleblowing disclosure, I have been subjected to the most appalling treatment. I'm not going to say any more about it, but I think that in itself should shame the organisation, and indeed higher. And then the final thing on the report, when I arrived to be interviewed, I didn't even know what it was doing. I didn't know that they were investigating the questions that I put. It was clear that they were investigating me to start with. After that interview, which was back at the end of sort of 2012, I had no further contact. And when I was reading the report the last couple of days, there are obviously things in it that I feel need correction or elaboration. Nothing was checked back with me, because the 11 questions I raised were, if you like, the tip of the iceberg. But at no point did they come back to me and talk to me about the questions or to ask further clarification, and I think that's regrettable.
Thank you, Chair. I think what I do apologise. Thank you. I think what we are doing in this report is responding to the 11 questions that I thought you were raising in the report. They're the questions that I inherited when I came into the organisation in July 2012. My recollection is I have updated the board in both private and public session that this review was taking place and that it will be investigating those questions.
David, could I come in? First of all, I want to put on record my thanks to David Behan, our new Chief Executive from last summer, for commissioning this report and for making sure that it was thoroughly investigated by an external agency and has been brought back to the board and published today. I think it's a sad reflection on the organisation that we had to get at the truth through an external investigation, particularly as apparently there had been an internal investigation anyway, which had presumably, although it's not, I don't know what exactly it said, but it appears to have covered much of the same issue that was in this latest report. And I think it reflects a lot of what we knew at the time and the board was concerned about. But I'll come back to the question of the handling of that internal report in a minute, because I think there are issues that arise from that we will need to discuss further. I also think that before we go any further, we ought to be clear in the future how we're going to pursue the point that Kay Sheldon's just made, which is that there are issues of facts in this report which he feels need to be pursued or corrected, as I understand it. And we need to obviously have some process for discussing those issues in the future. But if I can revert to what I wanted to say before Kay spoke, and on my reading of the report so far, I think there are two big areas that I want to comment on. The first is what this report tells us about how the CQC went about the process of regulating particularly hospitals. And there it covers some of the ground, much of the ground, which has been covered by other reports and other examinations into what the CQC did, and confirms points that the board has made in the past and which has concerned us. For example, and these are examples meant rather than a conclusive list, but the closure of the investigations unit is covered in the Grant Thornton report. The viability and value of the generic inspection model is questioned. The lack of consistency in our regulatory judgments, uncertainty as to the procedures that should be followed and the purpose that we're pursuing, the inadequate training and the skill sets which have been, which the organisation began its life with, and also, and I suppose culminating in much of our frustration, is the whole issue about what should be reported to the board and when and in what sort of detail. And I have a list of areas where I've expressed concerns about issues which should have been reported or could have been reported to the board and were not. All of those, I think, add with other reports that have taken place, and one of them is on, or a follow-up, and one of them is on the agenda later on the Winterbourne View hospital, add up, I think, to a more complete picture, now complete picture, about how the organisation went about its work in its early life and some of the major errors of judgment that were made in the strategic direction and operation of the organisation at the outset. And I want to pay tribute to David Bean for tackling a lot of those issues when he arrived and putting us on the course which I think we're now on, where we can overcome many, or are in the process of overcoming many of these difficulties and errors which were made in the past. And we can pursue some of those issues if you want now. But I do think that we do need to come back. This can't be just the whole discussion on this report. We need to come back at future meetings and pursue the progress of the changes, but also on to the second area that I've got concerned about, which is the lack of willingness of the previous executive team to share with the board the reality of what was taking place inside the organisation and in its regulatory process, the operation of its regulatory processes. Frankly, I regard the suppression of the internal review as disgraceful. I think that is absolutely appalling. I would like to see a copy of that report. It apparently still exists, and I think the board that report should be shared with the board. There are, I think, big issues about how we pursue that. We may not be able to pursue it today. I certainly found it difficult to understand what was actually happening because I didn't understand who the people were. I think I understand the legal advice, but I think it's a most unsatisfactory way of reporting a series of events. And I think we need to look more closely into who did what and whether all or any of the people who were involved are still working for the Commission. And then I'm not sure, Chair, how you want to pursue that in future. I just flag up that I think we've got to spend some time looking at that. And we also, I think, need to express our thanks to Grant Thornton for setting out a list of, or summarising a list of regulatory issues which they found, some of which I've covered already, which they found not to be properly implemented or properly operated. And to give you an example, about requiring a duty of disclosure on those that we inspect as part of the process of self-assessment and their disclosing information to us. And I'd like really a checklist of those items to be produced with an explanation of whether they've been implemented, whether they've been overcome, or whether they are yet to be decided. There's much more I could say, and I'm grateful, Chairman, for you and to you and the Chief Executive for the apologies which have been given, which I think are entirely in order and appropriate and overdue. I think we need to both discuss it now, but also discuss this report in the future. Thank you.
Can I just say that I haven't had an apology, just to make that clear. I haven't had an apology, so I just wanted to make that clear. I don't know if that's what you were assuming, but that hasn't happened, okay?
We'll keep going round. A few things, really. So, first of all, to start with, I mean, I think it has to be said. I know you've both said it, and John also, but what's described in this report is clearly unacceptable. It's unacceptable behaviour for an organisation, and it's absolutely unacceptable outcomes for consumers of the health and social care that we regulate, and really cannot be allowed to happen again in this way. And I think I would want to add my apology on behalf of the organisation to that which you've expressed. And just to reinforce that, to say that I would not wish to be part of an organisation as a member of a board which was still behaving in this way. And I think that takes me to the crunch, really, because what this report does is illustrate just how much there is to do in this organisation. Some of it we've already started, and some I think we still have to pursue in order to for us all to feel comfortable that it is a very, very different kind of organisation behaving in a very different way. So I also, as John has said, would wish to say thanks, David, for commissioning this work and for kind of grasping the nettle, if you like, because it clearly absolutely had to be done. And I recognise entirely that the new strategy and the consultation document that we've published addresses many of the themes in this report, but I'm not sure that it does address all of them, or perhaps I want some further assurance about some of them. So I would quite like to just, I think there are 5, maybe 6, I can't count, 6 things that I would just like to reference in terms of kind of big issues which come out of the report for me. And I guess the first is something which I think I had not understood, and I would like to know is either no longer the case or will be addressed, and that is that there wasn't a requirement on the part of registered entities to tell us about some of the things which they were doing or which were happening in their institutions, which we really ought to know about. And I'm thinking particularly of serious untoward incidents and the investigation which they commissioned in the Fielding Review. And it seems to me that can't be right. We must have access to that kind of intelligence from the institutions that we regulate, and if it isn't the case that they must disclose these things to us now, we need to know that it will be going forward. So that's point number one. That's about the people we regulate. I think there's also a very strong message in here about the people with whom we share regulatory responsibilities, our partners, and the fact that there wasn't the right kind of conversation going on with all of those parties, and Monitor in particular is referenced frequently in the report. And I do believe that we are addressing that now, actually already. It's very clearly signalled in the strategy. It's something that we're working on very, very much. So I mean, I feel comfortable that we've probably got that in our sights. Whereas the first of those issues, I would like some more reassurance about. The third set of issues are around staffing skills and expertise, and I think the consultation that we put out on Monday very clearly addresses that in terms of the kind of skills and expertise which we will build into inspection teams, and the commitment to develop the academy to ensure that all skill have the training that they need. So again, I don't believe we're in a place to put our hands on our hearts and say all is well, but I do believe we're in a place to say we know what the issues are and we've got means of addressing them, so I feel comfortable about that. The fourth set of issues are around risk, both the identification of risk and then the management of risk inside the organisation and the escalation of risk to the senior management team. And I find much of the detail in the report really very disturbing in terms of there seems to be an absence, a rather chaotic sense of how risk was both identified and addressed, certainly also in the way it was escalated. And I don't just mean to the board, I'll come to the board in a minute, but also, but actually to the senior management team. I find that very disconcerting, and clearly there are many issues in both the strategy and the consultation document which address that approach to risk. But actually, I'm not sure we can wait for all of that, that for the perfect solution to come through. I think we need some assurance in this next period. It's going to take us a while to change the organisation in the way the strategy describes, and I think we need some assurance in the organisation at the board level about the way in which these risks are being managed now. Which trusts, we're talking again here about hospitals, and that's not the full sum of our risk exposure, but let's just talk about hospitals for the moment. Which trusts are actually on our kind of red list right now, and what are we doing about them? I want to be confident about that as a board member, and this just kind of reinforces the need for that. So there's an interim measure I feel we need to really grapple with, to make sure that we're comfortable with those issues around risk. And similarly and relatedly, this question of escalation through the management. This is a big organisation regulating very many different kinds of entity, and I think it's absolutely critical that all staff are clear about the kinds of risks which need to come up through the management structure, so that they will end up with you, David, and your management team where appropriate, and can therefore be escalated to the board. And I'd like to just be comfortable again that we have a clear exposition of that, which all the staff could adopt and apply. So those are the 5 things relating specifically to the report. I think that the last thing that I would like us to make sure that we have right relates actually to Kay's position, and this whole question of the fact that she felt it necessary to whistleblow because she felt she wasn't being properly listened to within the organisation or at the board. And I know we've had some conversation in the past about this, particularly around the kind of process that we think it appropriate to follow if we have concerns, who we should talk to, in particular the list that Kay has already rehearsed. But I think there's something which I would like to be confident we all understand, which is what the, if you like, the formal process is for ensuring that if we have concerns of this nature, that we register them, and that there is a requirement that they be properly responded to, such that we shouldn't find ourselves in this position in the future. Now, maybe that exists, but I'm not sure it does. And I think there's something very valuable about having a very explicit kind of registration and response, which is on the record, even if it's not in the public domain in the first instance. So those are the things that fall out of this for me, and as you can see, many of them I think will be addressed by the strategy, but I think a couple of them I would like some more reassurance about, and the issue around risk in particular, I'd like us to have some interim thoughts about to make sure that we feel comfortable. Thank you.
Obviously, I agree with a great deal that's been said. I'd like to support Anna's requests for further information. I certainly share John's horror at what's in the report, and I just wanted to express my concern that as serious and as critical as this report is, and how as abject our apologies are, this must come as very little consolation to Mr. Titcombe and other people who were affected so personally. I don't want to repeat what John or Anna or Kay have said, and I hesitate to say this, but I think at some point we've got to look forward. I agree. So I just want to emphasise how much I support Anna's talk about making sure that we learn the lessons, because there are always lessons to be learned, and you know, this is full of some very, very important things that we have got to look at. So the Francis report concentrated or focused on the absence of leadership and culture and how important they were in that particular acute trust. What this report, of course, does is illustrate how important it is here as well. as it is in any organisation. And I think this was reads to me as a failure of leadership in the organisation. So to that extent, we have a responsibility to make sure that the leadership organisation is clear, transparent, strategic, and all the things that we've been talking about in the strategy for almost a year now. But at the same time, I think we also have to support the staff who are on the ground doing the work, who in my very limited experience are extremely committed, very sincere, show a great deal of integrity and work very hard. They are being damned, understandably, and probably not without some cause for the past, but that can't go on. If we're going to succeed as an organisation and deliver what both the public and the government want and expect from a regulator, we've got to look forward, and we've got to actually, I think, train, develop, encourage and show the leadership and direction that this organisation so desperately wants. Now, I think that's happening. And I think John's word about the change of climate since David arrived, I also share. But I do think that we've got this important responsibility to our staff. And the other important thing is that we must make as sure as we possibly can, and I don't think we can ever be eliminate that risk that Anna was talking about, that this never ever happens again. Or if it does, we certainly don't hide it again, or be accused of hiding it again. I've always believed that regulators depend very heavily on their reputation to command the respect amongst the people they're regulating. Otherwise, people will hide things from us, or will conceal the true state of affairs. There is now, highlighted by Francis' report, the duty of candour. I think that's important, but I think we have to actually be in a position where people want to share stuff with us from the very top of the organisation. I respect completely the role of whistleblowers, but a regulatory authority can't depend on whistleblowing. We have got to actually be able to regulate the services that we are meant to regulate in an effective way through an inspection regime and all the other tools available to us. So I think it's an important report, and I share others' concerns.
The directors had a go at putting their view. Paul, do you want to express a view?
I agree with everything that's been said, that we let people down, the organisation let people down, and let them come down completely and unacceptably. I think we now have the obligation to get right and put right the wrongs that the report lays out so clearly. I think the strategy and the consultation document are the start of that. As Anna said, they're the start of the journey. They're not enough in itself, and we need to be judged by what we do, not just what we say. But fundamentally, we need to be a regulator that's strong and that's independent and that's genuinely on the side of the public and the people who use our services.
Thank you, Paul. Does anyone else like to chip in before I just sort of wrap up? Well, I think it's a damning report, however you look at it. It's a huge criticism of leadership at the top. I do believe in the old adage that the fish rots from the head, and I think that the board of the organisation has to take the prime responsibility for what's happened. I think we have some extremely good inspectors, and I think they should not be tarnished by this. The vast majority of our inspectors become inspectors because they care deeply about health and social care, and they want to make a difference. And we've let them down. We've let the public down. We've let many people down. And I think we've let a lot of our staff down. So there's a failure of leadership. There's also been a complete failure of strategy. You know, we made. I remember just when I took on this job, doing a bit of due diligence, a number of people saying to me, you know, every time CQC made a strategic decision, they got it wrong, every time. And I think that if I had to point out the most serious failure of strategy, it was this what appears to me now to be an extraordinary belief that a generalist inspector could do a job in a hospital, or indeed in a mental health trust, or a learning difficulties, or a dementia unit. You know that one of the light bulb moments of this report happened at the end of June 2010, when two of our inspectors, probably good people, I'm sure they were good people, you know, went into the maternity services at Morecambe Bay and said that it was compliant. 2 months later, the Fielding report comes out, you know, which was a detailed specialist report, which says that not only was it not compliant, but it was not safe, and that they made 40 detailed recommendations. Now, how can two generalist inspectors go into maternity services for a day and come out with anything meaningful? And that has happened at every hospital in the country. So we can have no confidence, I think, not just at Morecambe Bay, but across many more hospitals, that we have done a proper job. And it's not because our inspectors aren't good people, and some of them are experienced and have expertise. It's because we got the strategy absolutely wrong by going for a generalist method of inspection, not a specialist one. And I think our future plans to have a chief inspector of hospitals, Professor Sir Mike Richards, leading serious inspection teams along the lines actually of the Bruce Keogh model, when looking at outliers now, is absolutely the right one. And the second thing I think to say about Morecambe Bay is, you know, even without the inspection, should we have picked it up from our intelligence? And the answer is, of course we should. You know, 6 babies had died. I mean, you know, of course we should have picked it up. And at the time, 6 babies had died. And so I'm looking at Paul now on the work that we're doing on intelligence. You know, a proper surveillance system, so we know what is going on. We didn't have it. We collected reams of data, but actually, was there any intelligent interpretation of that data and link with the operations side of CQC? And the answer is no, it wasn't. I mean, when Anna was talking about the identification of risk and the escalation of risk, it is critical, this. I mean, I remember the first meeting I came here, you know, what hospitals should we be worried about? We didn't know. We must have a list of hospitals, and it must be a list that is evidence-based and evidence-backed up, that we can rely upon. Now, I just want to end. Now, I've said there was a failure of leadership, a failure of strategy, and there was also a failure of operational delivery. You know, there was a lack of urgency, it wasn't joined up, and the cover-up of the meeting, the attempted deletion of that report is just symptomatic of an organisation where the culture has gone wrong, where the relationship between the executive and the board had gone wrong. It's symptomatic of a failing organisation. And I'd just like to end because, and to just publicly acknowledge the courage that it took Kay to pursue this. It is not easy being a whistleblower. I completely understand that. It is not easy. And so I'd just like to put it on record to thank you, Kay, for doing that. And just perhaps the final word is what Paul said: judge us by what we do, not by what we say. You know, we have got to deliver on this. No one over the last 6 months has said that we don't need a regulator. You know, we need an effective regulator. We must be able to give assurance to the public that care is safe, it's effective, it's caring, it's responsive, and that the organisations that we register are well led. So judge us by what we do, not what we say. I think we should probably have a break now, if we can, and just maybe just reflect on what we've all said a bit. We will not let this rest. We will come back to the board. We'll give a report to ministers as well as to what we've learned from this, what we're doing about it, to make sure it never happens again. So should we just break now for coffee? Thank you. Right. David, your report, please.
Yeah, thank you, David. So, a brief report. Thank you. Apologies. A brief report this month, Chair. I cover 4 things. Firstly, on Monday of this week, we launched a consultation document which set out the changes that we are proposing to make in our activities, the way we inspect, the surveillance we'll undertake, the way we will register, the action we will take, and the propositions around ratings. That document has been published on Monday of this week, and we're following that up by a pretty extensive process of internal and external events to have face-to-face discussions with key stakeholders. The document asks a number of questions on which we are inviting feedback to help us settle some issues, and we look forward to people coming back to us. They'll do that by the middle of August. What we'll then do is further consider the feedback, and that will then inform subsequent consultations that we'll make as we build up the change model of inspection and surveillance and ratings. I've set out in the report the range of roadshows, advisory group meetings, etc. that we're taking forward. They've begun and are underway now, and the initial feedback from those has been favourable. But there is more to do.
I just wondered, could we have a copy of the programme, and would you please indicate if you think it useful for us to attend any of those meetings?
We will, Chair, and I think it would be helpful if commissioners were able to be present. I know, Steve, you were present at some of the strategy development sessions, and I thought that helped immensely. And the second issue is the care bill. This is was considered on the 12th of June at the Lords Committee stage, and this covers warning notices for trusts and foundation trusts. This is a change from the current way of operating, and I set that out in the report. I also cover the single failure regime, the limits on providers deregistering, the fact that this board is becoming a unitary board, and there will now be a criminal offence of providing false or misleading information, which is not unrelated to the first item of this board this afternoon. You'll see from the report that a number of amendments were tabled and were withdrawn, as I think ministers were able to give reassurance to members of the committee in relation to the intention behind some of these actions. And there's a further committee session scheduled for the 3rd of July, when further consideration will be given to responsibilities around ratings and the market oversight, which we are asked to take forward. The James Mayes Awards, these are awards which are in memory of a young member of staff from the Healthcare Commission who was sadly and tragically killed in the London bombings in July 2005. Since that time, there's been memorial awards made in James's memory that his parents and his friend are also part of the judging framework. And I set out in this report the fact that we've decided to award scholarships to 4 individuals who all wish to undertake some research in relation to their activity. What struck me about judging these awards for the first time, Chair, was the talent that these individuals demonstrated and their inquisitiveness to actually understand their role and move forward. And I thought there were 4 really credible research proposals which they'll be supported to take forward and will feed back into the organisation. And then lastly, I just outlined the progress that we've made in appointing Mike Richards as Chief Inspector of Hospitals. We're active in relation to the recruitment of the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care, and we're looking for the Chief Inspector for General Practice to be in the adverts either this weekend or next weekend. I've also listed the non-executive director announcements that you made last week, Chair. I ask you to note the report. Thank you.
Yeah, can I quickly ask, is Mike Richards joining us in September, and can we say that publicly?
You can say he's joining us in August, Chair. Yeah. But he will be joining us. A serious point in this is there are a number of things that are coming up. The consultation document which went out, Mike was able to have a look at, and there'll be events coming up which he's actively assisting with now. I think it is fair to say he's beginning to focus on the job that he's got.
Just going back to the first thing, I mean, I'd be very interested to, so the consultation, I'd be very interested, as Steve suggested, to see the programme and to be able to participate in that. But just to say something which I've said a couple of times, but I'm particularly keen to see is some sort of process which I would not describe as consultation in quite the way that people understand consultation, but something which is much more in the space of involvement, which would allow ordinary users and consumers of service to engage with the fundamental standards and the way that those are shaped going forward. And if that's not that kind of activity isn't in this list here, I've been assured that there is some activity of that sort, but it'd be really good if the note covered that off as well, so we can see what the whole plan is.
Absolutely, a very important part of the consultation will be more than just the sort of the stakeholder engagement. It will be directly with users of the service, and it will include key questions about how they want to receive information about services in different sectors. So I will include that in the note that we pass around, which includes also the dates for the formal events.
Thank you, Chair. The board you've got before you a very brief finance report for the first 2 months of the year. I think I'd just like to remind the board of the budget for the year and how we're going to report the figures going forward. We have a recurring budget of 159 million for the current year. We also, on top of that, we also have a transformation budget of 20 million, and the paper sets out on page 3 just how that transformation budget is made up. There's 12 million recurring costs going forward for this year and for the subsequent financial year, and 8 million non-recurring costs in the current financial year for setting up the transformation programme, which you're going to hear more about from Hilary later on the agenda. The total costs then for CQC for the year are 179 million, and if we take off our fee income of 100 million for the current financial year, we're left with grant and aid of 79 million for the current financial year. This compares to grant and aid in the previous financial year of 60 million, so we have a net increase of 19 million. We also have a capital budget of 17 million this year compared to 12 million in the previous financial year. So I think overall the funding that has been agreed with the Department of Health, a total of 79 million grant and aid revenue and 17 million capital for the current year. Our costs, the report sets out only the recurring costs for the first 2 months of the year. We are in the process of setting up the reporting for the transformation budget. There was a spend of approximately £1 million on transformation costs noted on at the top of page 3 so far this year. Really the costs of salary costs for setting up the two new directorates, Directorate of Change and the Directorate for Strategy and Intelligence. So the recurring costs, you can see from the summary, very much in line with budget for the first 2 months of the year. The transformation costs will be reported separately. We're in the process of setting that up and allocating budgets across the directorates for the total of 20 million transformation, the 20 million transformation budget for the current year. One of the things I think that the board should be aware of, the recurring costs that we have agreed here with the Department of Health assumes a fixed number of in-depth hospital inspections for the current year, and any changes that the Secretary of State may want to make, or indeed we want to make, in terms of the number of in-depth inspections over and above what we've budgeted would in fact require additional funding, which would be subject to negotiation with the Secretary of State and the Department of Health. So all of that, the work is ongoing. We're currently working across the business, looking at how we're going to model the in-depth inspections, the numbers that are required, the costs, etc. We've had a couple of workshops already, and that will, over the next few weeks, we'll finalise what the recurring cost might be in the next financial year, depending on some of the strategic decisions that we, and indeed the board, might make. So the transformation budget is fixed for the current year. I think we've got adequate funding for that, but there's a bigger question around 14-15, which needs to be addressed by the business going forward. I think that's really all I want to say. There'll be a full report to the board at the July board meeting, setting out the transformation costs that we have incurred in the first quarter, and then quarterly reports to the board thereafter.
Thank you, John. John?
David, yes, speaking with my audit hat on, I'm conscious that the external auditors have suggested that it's important that Healthwatch funding and spending is shown separately in our accounts, or identifiable separately in our accounts. This report certainly includes at the bottom of page 3 a statement about the spend of Healthwatch to the end of May. But what it doesn't explain is the relationship between the table at the bottom of page 3 and the table at the top of page 2. And my query is really, wouldn't it be simpler just to have separate lines for Healthwatch in the overall summary, so that we could see how the the rather smaller sum of Healthwatch fitted into the rather larger sum of the CQC? Not necessarily for now, but for future reports.
Can you do that, John? Yeah. I mean, I think what this shows is that the Department of Health are putting a huge amount of trust and resources in us to transform the way we do our business. At a time when money is incredibly tight, we are getting a very significant increase in the resources available to us. Steve?
Just one question. I wasn't clear, and I'm sure I missed it. The recurring transformation budget of 12 million, was John saying that we have got no provision for that in next year's income?
The table sets out the additional costs that CQC are going to incur in the current financial year. There's a total of 20 million allocated to the transformation budget.
12 of that is recurring.
Correct. So we've already agreed tentatively at this stage, I think, with the Department of Health, that 12 million will roll forward into 14-15. The point I was making was that should the inspection programme change and we want to do more in-depth inspections in hospitals in 14-15, we would need to go back to the Department of Health and discuss that further. However, I think it's also worth pointing out here that as part of the overall strategy going forward, this is a matter really for the board, we may be able to take a different approach to social care, inspections, for example, going forward based on a more comprehensive risk model. And it could well be, and this is what we need to work through in the next number of weeks, months, that we just shift some of the costs of social care inspections into more in-depth hospital inspections in 14-15 and 15-16. And that's what we're trying to work up at the moment.
So is that point related to the sort of challenge that you've, or that's alluded to in the last paragraph, which is around sort of allocating the transformation budget? So it seems, I'm just thinking, how are we going to ensure that it is allocated appropriately and does fit in with our kind of strategic direction, if you like?
Well, I think that's something, again, that the transformation steering group the transformation team are looking at. We've been allocated these figures based on the information we gave to the Department of Health, the 12 million and the 8 million. Of course, we know there's a lot more behind this table than what actually is in this report. A lot of detail behind this Table K, which sets out just exactly how this money is being allocated. That will be allocated into separate cost centres managed by either the Director of Change or indeed the Strategy Director and Corporate Services to a degree going forward. So we have got quite a bit of information here already, which is not in this paper, as to how that money is going to be spent.
So you're saying there's a kind of strong governance planning process to make sure that it is allocated?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think it will be monitored on an ongoing basis through the transformation steering group.
So I think Hillary's going to present on the transformation programme. The transformation programme board will oversee this. We've had meetings this week which have begun the process of finalising the programme plans, and the detailed action that will be taken will then, as John has indicated, allocate that money alongside those, and there'll be subsequent and regular reports to the board from the transformation programme board. I'm chairing the Transformation Programme Board, and Hilary will report on a regular basis to the board, I think as we discussed last time, but that's a process. So this is live work of taking that initial costing that John did with the Department of Health and then applying it to the actual transformation programmes that we're actually building for this year. So I think good progress is being made.
Yeah, and I think we'll ask Hilary to come to every board meeting to keep the board fully apprised where we are. And here she is. Hilary, you're going to give us a presentation about where we've got to.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Board. When I came here on the 22nd of May, I introduced myself as a fairly new Director of Change, and I talked then about the transformation programme and the key areas of change we were looking at. I also spoke briefly about the timelines for what's a 3-year programme of change. What I was trying to do last time was to give you a sense of the grip we were taking of a planned and orderly approach to change, which is thorough and professional, given that what we're doing is transformative. It's not only our regulatory model and the changes we're going to make to its concept and its the processes we need, but it's also transformation of how CQC structures itself, manages itself, performance manages itself, skills and capability of its people, the way we use communication engagement throughout, and the way we provide ongoing leadership and leave CQC as a world-class regulator through the transformation programme. So it's a pretty big programme. I'm here today to provide a short update on what's happened since the May board. And there's 3 areas I wanted to focus on today, and I've called them the nuts and bolts, which is a bit of an undersell really, some of the first deliverables from this programme, and then today I really wanted to focus on the culture and engagement work stream. So the nuts and bolts are really about what we've been doing to organise ourselves to deliver. So John's just talked to you about the budget. A really key feature is to take a tight grip on having decided why we're doing what we're doing, make sure we're doing the right things, and then have who, what, how, when, how much in really rigorous order, and to have governance to support that and to demand challenge of the programme so that we keep it all together. So we've got an operating set of principles. We have a programme board which met for the first time almost as a dress rehearsal a couple of weeks back and meets again towards the end of this month. A communications approach to co-development involving and informing, which we're embedding in every single work stream. And a programme of ongoing staff engagement. Resources absolutely key, not just the money, but the skills and the capability. So we have a resource plan where we've now really got nailing down the skills and capability we do have within the organisation, and the skills and capacity and capability that we need to bring in. So, for instance, we are bringing in additional programme managers. This isn't a small programme. We need people who understand the disciplines and rigour of programmatic management. A resource manager, because we will be recruiting inspectors. Special inspectors, we need somebody really focused on making sure we do that well. We're bringing in a workforce planner. Before we can recruit, we need to know what the workforce plan will look like. Bringing in some more project support. Bringing in an integration manager, key risk of this programme is the absence of an integration across all the strands. And we've brought in already someone to lead on a development of the academy offer, for instance. So we're already tackling some of the resource gaps we know, but that will continue to be a nuts and bolts issue for us over the next couple of months.
Just on that, just before you move on, the academy staff, trained staff, is so critical to everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how other members of the board feel. I think we ought to have spend some time on that, specifically on the academy, because, I mean, you know, Ofsted have a different model. You know, they outsource a lot of their inspectors. I think they put it out to 3 different suppliers. Now, I don't know whether we should think about outsourcing, whether we should try to all in-house, whether we should get external help or bits. But I just do know that getting the right inspectors who are trained properly. I don't want to find ourselves putting an elastoplast over, you know, giving them a bit of e-learning on top of. You know, it's got to be a really robust piece of work. So I don't know if other people feel. I think we really ought to spend some time on this, if we could.
If I leap to a first early deliverable, we've brought someone in to develop an offer for the academy. And at the moment, we're co-developing that with staff. So this week, next, and the week after, Ian's out and about with groups of our people focused on what their expectations are, what we believe our first offer is, and to help us develop a proposition for an academy which is actually up and running.
But don't get so far down the track that actually, if we've got comments to make, it's sort of too late.
You're part of the co-development, I think. That would be good. So we'll have our first programme board for this at the end of June, when we'll be nailing down the baseline overall programme plan, the first iteration of a blueprint, which says this is what we've got to achieve and this is how, the resource plan accompanied by the budgeting to keep a tight grip on it. So we've been doing a lot of that, a lot of mobilisation, a lot of workshops really to involve people across the business, so not just project people, but our people who are currently delivering our frontline inspections and our registration, our intel people, our enabling functions have all got to be part and parcel of setting up this governance to succeed. We've also sought input from a number of expert domains as we go about setting this up. So Department of Health have been very helpful in giving us their informal assessment of what we're doing in terms of setting up our programme. We've looked at the common causes of failure. There's screeds of research on why programmes fail. Common causes of failure are failure to have a strategic fit. That isn't our biggest risk. Leadership, ownership and sponsorship throughout the period, where we look to all of us around this table and beyond. Lack of staff engagement is a common cause of failure. Lack of skills, critically lack of proper planning at the front end, a lack of integration and a lack of focus on costs. So we're seeking in the way we set up to start mitigating the risks that become the common causes of failure. And as I said, we've done quite a lot of that. So it may look as if we're really scrubbing the tyres on this one very, very carefully, but that's for a reason, because we can't afford to fail. Early deliverables, the consultation document published on Monday, and Paul's going to take you through the conduct a bit later on. That was a key deliverable and delivered through project disciplines. The recruitment of our inspectors is an early deliverable, and David's already mentioned Mike Richards. We've developed in other ways a change narrative, which we're already using in live time with our people, which is going down very well. That's a classic piece of programme material, but why we're changing, how we're changing, what difference that will make to the processes and what we ask our people to do. And as I said, we're co-developing at the moment the early thoughts around an academy from our staff's point of view, with some expectation that we'll have an offer ready to start an academy live in the autumn. But I think it would be really good to come back here to talk about that first set of insight from our people, and to get the insight from here. It'd be really good. So I've talked about nuts and bolts, early deliverables. I just wanted to focus down culture and engagement, really critical strand for us, common cause of failure, one we're determined not to go to. We've got a number of roadshows at the moment for every single member of our staff all around the country. designed to engage with our staff, focused on the consultation document, what the regulatory model is, our plans for changing the way we work, how we're going to implement the strategy through a change programme, and giving staff plenty of opportunity to discuss the plans and ask questions both about that and actually anything else they want to talk about. We started that last week with a roadshow on Friday. We've got around 40 throughout June and July, so I'm doing 4 next week, for instance, and I suspect the same is true for other directors around this table. In addition and in parallel, we're doing the provider session specifically on the conduct, which you've already talked about as well. So a lot of engagement going on. There's also plenty of functional conferences and get-togethers, which we're using every opportunity to talk about the approach to change, the change narrative, the consultation document, etc. I just wanted to pause briefly on an element of our cultural engagement. So today, our staff woke up, as everyone else did, to coverage of their place that they work in being front of news on the media, written and broadcast. And I know you've been discussing that this morning. One signal perhaps of the changed culture is that we've asked our staff through messages today, first thing, to talk about that coverage, to talk about how they feel with their colleagues, to actually express and reflect how they're feeling about it, and to reflect on what we're going to do differently going forward. So we're having that conversation today in a much more open way. Quite personal, honest messages have gone out from each of our regional directors and our leaders to all of our people, so that we're being open about it, transparent. I've seen some of the responses coming back from our inspectors out in the field and from people up in the National Customer Service Centre saying, thank you for being honest and transparent and talking about a culture of owning, fixing and learning. And that's possibly the overriding reaction from staff at the moment. I've just been talking with some who are down on level 1 today. So it's a really important signal that we've been able to do that and that we will continue to do that, and we're not going to pretend that it didn't happen. It did. We're learning and we're moving forward. So I think that's a good signal of culture for today. Hard day for our staff, but one we will face to the future. So transformation, absolutely very pacey, very busy, and I look forward to coming back for a fuller session next month.
Picking up on that last word, pacey, I mean, pace. I know we can run too fast and fall over, but pace is very important.
It is.
Alan.
I just want to, there's always a tension between the pace and the amount of room for engagement, but I like your use of the term co-creation, co-development with reference to the board. And I think David's absolutely right that we need to have the opportunity to do that. I don't think that's probably in public board sessions. I think there needs to be an opportunity for us to have a kind of, and we need to reflect on the programme in our governance role, but I think we also need to have the opportunity to have more creative discussions of a kind of more classically brainstormy type about these big issues as they crop up. I think because of the pace, we didn't have the opportunity perhaps to do that around fundamental standards, for instance, and I hope we'll do it when we get to the next phase, but we do have the opportunity to do it around the academy and whatever the next deliverables are. So I just really encourage that, because I think that will be important to our ownership and leadership of the whole of the programme going forward, is that we have also had the opportunity to make a contribution to the thinking before we then clear and approve the proposals.
I very much welcome.
Yeah, just on that, Anna, for the July meeting, I'm hoping to convert that into a sort of an away day type. We'll have a board meeting first thing on the morning of on the 31st of July, I think it is, and then I thought we would spend the rest of the day talking about the transformation project, and then on the intelligence surveillance metrics that Paul is developing, and have an informal chat about it the evening before the board as well.
No, that's fine.
Thanks for the update. A couple of things. Obviously, it was a very sort of high-level sort of overview. And one of the things that I know is comes up a lot is about how we make sure that we, when we're developing our new approach, that we do give sufficient emphasis to maybe areas that sometimes can get neglected, like sort of mental health. Because, of course, mental health, most of mental health services are provided in the community. They're not provided in a hospital. So, and of course, it's right that we are particularly focusing on hospitals, but it would be good to just sort of satisfy ourselves that sort of other areas where that get less media coverage actually are sufficiently reflected in our sort of planning. And the other issue is the staff engagement and culture. And I think that, depending on time, I'm sure that's something board members could get involved in. And it would be good actually to have the change narrative so that we're clear about what the kind of, what we're actually saying.
Thank you for that, Kay. On the mental health area, one of the things we're trying to be really clear on is that this is a 3-year programme. We're starting with our focus on hospitals, but actually there are huge other areas as well. And mental health we've already established as one of our key work streams because we can and should do much better thinking and doing about it. And the change narrative, absolutely, really happy to share that. It's a good story to use. So thank you.
Comment on the mental health stream that you're doing on there.
Yes, absolutely. Hillary's absolutely right that we will have a separate piece of work on mental health, but I think there's something broader to say as well, is that we want to make sure that in having 3 chief inspectors, the result isn't that we see people as fitting in naturally into any of those 3 boxes. We think there are several cohorts of people who use services who quite clearly cut across those, and mental health use are clearly one of those such groups. And so we are putting forward our thinking on what the way to go through the patient journey, the service user journey is, and how we can look at regulation in the context of what people who actually use services actually see, as opposed to only the providers. So that's an important part of our work going forward, and I'll talk a bit more about our ongoing plans in the next agenda item. On the point you raised, Chair, about the academy, we've also started conversations not just about the what we could call the harder skills that we absolutely need to make sure our specialist inspectors have, but also what are the set of behaviours that we would expect everybody to have. And for one recent conversation, for example, is whether we can, what will it take for our organisation to be the most consumer-focused organisation across health and care as an aspiration. But if we are serious about that, and we've said that we are firmly on the side of people who use services and we're independent, then we need to think seriously about what the training programme is. Clearly a lot is just is up here, but we know that other organisations have gone through structured programmes in order to develop that strong consumer focus. So that's something we're also considering.
Okay. Thank you.
Just briefly, to follow up from Kay's request that we become engaged with this process, I just wanted to report that Hilary and I have already exchanged emails on this subject, and I think she has every intention of volunteering all board for engagement in the culture and leadership programme, including the members who aren't even here yet.
Got an eye to the future. Okay. Thank you, and I look forward to creating that world-class regulator.
So slides on the consultation document are coming round, but by way of introduction to agenda item 8, what I'll try and cover is 2 elements: the consultation content and the consultation plan. And Chris is also here with more detail on the planning element. I think the first thing to say is this is the first of many consultations. This one sets out the overall operating model and gives more detail on the acute trust, acute hospitals regulatory model. there will be a subsequent consultation in September or October on adult social care. There'll be a further one before the end of the year on primary care. There will be further consultations, statutory consultations around the regulations due to be introduced in secondary legislation by April 2014, and that pattern will just carry on because we're changing the organisation, its operating model from top to bottom. That's the natural implication, is that we need to co-create and consult on all the changes that we're making. The second thing to say is that we've had an awful lot of input into the consultation, for which we're extremely grateful, and that includes from board members, so thank you. And we've also had input from large numbers of other people within the system on an in-confidence draft basis. And we're also thankful to those people for commenting as well and taking their time. And the staff has spent an enormous amount of work and time getting the consultation to quite a short time scale, as Hilary has said, on some project disciplines, to get it out to the due date of the 17th of June, which was this Monday. One thing I take some comfort in is that this is, I think, an example of the way we're working differently. This wasn't a piece of work that was hatched within the sort of the minds of 3 or 4 policy people. This genuinely did take into account the views from people outside the system, and just within the organisation, the operations directorate were heavily involved, as was the communications directorate and intelligence as examples. And that's the way we need to do this. This has got to be owned by our staff as well as accepted as a credible approach by the outside world. As Chris says, we will send round more details of the consultation plan and specific events, but I'll try and cover those off in the slides. Let me talk to these slides then. The first page, page 2, tries to summarise what will be different as a result of the new model. It doesn't attempt to do everything, of course, but fundamentally we want to completely move away from a yes-no compliance approach. It's something that our inspectors absolutely want to move away from, and I've been on inspection and people say, well, this is of course how I have to report it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're comfortable with that way. And I'll talk on the next page about the key questions that we'll be asking instead. But fundamentally we'll move into professional intelligence-based judgments, as you know, and that's backed up by clear ratings across all the different sectors against the 5 critical domains of safety, effectiveness, caring, well-led and responsiveness to individuals' needs. The legislative framework is changed. I think that's important to be clear about, and that's what I meant by the secondary legislation in April 2014. We currently use the 2009 regulations, 28 of them and 16 outcomes. There will be a reduced number of regulations that will include the fundamental standards, or what's called the fundamentals of care, as well as the additional requirements that we need to make effective judgments and legally binding judgments against each of the 5 questions. There's, I think, been a perception that CQC is part of the system, and that's its sort of foremost concern, with responsibility for improvement, and we need to make the change that we are fundamentally on the side of patients and we're independent as a regulator, and that starting with acute hospitals, we will not be in the enforcement business. That will be for the likes of Monitor and the Trust Development Authority, as well as commissioners and provider boards. As Chair said earlier, we will move completely away from a generous inspection model to specialists and teams of experts, be those social care experts, acute hospital experts, mental health experts, primary care experts. We'll spend longer, particularly in hospitals, with larger teams, spending more time speaking to staff and to patients, and that, to the point on the finance discussion, will drive how much money, how much resources we need, as well as the issue on how many inspections we intend to carry out per year. And finally, we will move away from not holding members of boards of providers to account for the quality of care, a particular issue seen at Winterbourne View.
Just so I'm absolutely clear on this.
Yeah.
Individuals at board level want to be account for the quality of care. I mean, just apply that to Morecambe Bay, for example, because it covers NHS bodies as well as private ones.
It does.
I mean, if it was found that there'd been the breakdown in care in maternity services at Morecambe Bay was systemic and that it was unsafe, would the directors of Morecambe Bay under the new regime be criminally liable for that?
I think it's fair to say there's a discussion still going on in policy terms about this in the Department of Health. And what's the best thing I can say on this? Certainly, if there was a breach of the duty of candour, as an example, that would absolutely be something that could be prosecuted against at the organisational level, and that affects the board.
So, for example, Paul, I'm sorry.
No.
I mean, if the Fielding report, they'd known about the Fielding report at Morecambe Bay and deliberately not given it to us, knowing that it was something of huge interest to us, that will be a breach of the duty of candour. I mean, you don't have the specifics, but that kind of thing will be a breach.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, it's not being candid about quality about care and care failings.
Yeah.
But I think there is a separate question about whether there is an additional need for a specific duty of disclosure, which the report throws up and which we need to then just now discuss as the care bill's going through. Frankly.
Yeah. Steve.
Surely, I mean, I think they're the right question to ask, Chair. But surely our role is to make sure that it doesn't get that far. This is I think is one of the new ways that we could prevent that. I mean, I have vivid memories of the Comprehensive Performance Assessment of Local Authorities being summoned to the Audit Commission to explain what was going on. And that's not a tactic we tend to use at the moment with failing institutions. I think David's beginning to introduce it, but it certainly wasn't how we dealt with failing regimes in any organisation that we regulate until relatively recently. And, it's your fish again rotting at the top.
So, on your specific question around Morecambe Bay, the current legislation, the 2008 Act, does make some provision in Section 37 for people to knowingly tell us whether there be material changes to the commitment that they make on registration. So there's already some responsibility on them. And I think that's what the reference in the Grant Thornton report to the Fielding report was about. I think Paul's absolutely right. The current proposition is that the duty of candour, and this was covered in the Care Bill updates in my report, will actually put organisations under a duty of candour to describe changes in their circumstances, and that will come through our regulations. That won't be in primary legislation, be in secondary legislation, and we will need to both identify that and then enforce that through our regulatory action moving forward. I think there's also some discussion, and again this isn't certain, there's a policy debate to take place, about whether there should be a criminal offence, and this is where the debate is taking place in policy terms, around providing misleading information. This is largely about statistical information, and this focuses on some of these stories which have been in the media over the past 12 months about suppressing standard mortality rates or emphasising septicemia rates or any of the other conversations that have gone on. And the proposition is that becomes a criminal offence. I think on this one, this stems from Winterbourne, and the proposition here is that we change, in technical terms, the notice of proposal, which means that we can take action against boards and individuals where they are named as being responsible for quality. So on the Winterbourne case, in Castlebeck, there was nobody at the board level that was named as being responsible for quality, and these changes would allow CQC to pursue at a board level the person that was responsible for quality. In Winterbourne, criminal prosecutions were taken against staff that worked at Winterbourne, and indeed some have been convicted and imprisoned as a consequence of that. But there was no other way of holding the board and the most senior people to account. So the proposition on this last two sets of bullet points of moving from and to is really the work that we're undertaking to capture that. So I think there's three things going on, if I may, Chair. There's the changes that we're making to the way that we register, which places a duty on boards around quality. Secondly, there's a duty of candour, which is arising post-Francis, which will be regulatory that we will police. And then thirdly, there's a debate about false and misleading information, which is really about people presenting in an open and honest way the data relating to things like death rates. And it's that last one which has got the most debate going on around it in terms of the contention. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Could I make one more comment on this slide? I'm very much in favour of the statement on the side of the people who use the services. And I think that one of the things that I'd like to see happen is that we change our relationship with members of the public, patients and their families in particular, from the position where they feel that making a complaint is a very sterile process. You feel disempowered by making a complaint. Something must be done. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the complaints end up here. They don't know who to go to. So I think we've talked in the past about better signposting, and we made that submission when there was a consultation on complaints. But I think one of the things that we ought to be aiming to do is possibly turn the general public and patients and their families into part of our inspection team and make them feel not only we're on their side, but they're also on our side. And I think that's a subtlety in the culture that we need to approach.
Sorry, risk of prolonging, but just to say that, well, as colleagues know, that the CQC published something talking about the way people felt about raising concerns about services at the weekend. But Healthwatch England has got its first national conference tomorrow and will be publishing a report on the strength of which actually I'll be writing to you, David, and other chairs of key players in health and social care, talking about the findings that we've made and the need for complaints and concerns, this whole kind of continuum from feedback through to complaints, to be sort of rather radically altered if we're to arrive at a situation where people do feel that their partners, consumers and users do feel that they're partners in this, rather than potentially vulnerable players who don't have trust and confidence in the system and don't come forward. So I think there's some vehicles here for taking forward that conversation, I hope.
David, can I... Well, I want to say the same. Sorry, I want to reinforce the point that's being made. So perhaps you could respond after I've spoken, which is I strongly support Anna's view on this, and I do think it's something that we perhaps need to come back and look at in an holistic way, because it's been the whole issue about how you make complaints or feedback on quality of services to the CQC. And the process for doing it and how people are treated when they do it has been an issue of concern to board members, both individually and collectively, for virtually as long as I've been on the board. And we've tackled the issue about how easy it is to access the website and feed things back into the CQC that way, through to how people are treated when they actually phone up the National Care Customer Centre, and how they're treated, how they're talked to, and I'm still uneasy that we haven't yet properly pursued this through to the end. I'm glad that we've obviously done some work on why people don't do it, which is an important step forward. I certainly find it fascinating that people will recount to me on a number of occasions personally poor care that they've received. But when I say to them, please feed that into the CQC, they come up with all sorts of reasons why they can't or they won't or they feel unable to do that. And I think we've got to look at the whole issue about how people react, whether we are making it as easy as possible to gather that information and feed it into the process. So I'm glad it's been raised, but I don't think it's a matter just of consultation. I think it's a matter of proper analysis and possibly more research about why and how people react, and how we can encourage them to react in a way that we and they would find helpful.
So I completely agree. We'll take forward two specific elements. So one is to keep doing that research. We've been offered more joint research work with the Department of Health, and this would be an excellent thing to use that sort of money for, because we need to do better. but I also think the reality is we need to accept that we won't. Not everybody who wants to express a concern will express it to the CQC. In fact, I'd be amazed if that was where the majority of concerns were expressed. So we have a whole set of other areas that we need to use. The Friends and Family test that went live from April for A&E and inpatient that rolls out for maternity from October. The full use of social media. So we have work underway with a firm to look at sort of what we call sentiment analysis on what social media is saying about about any given organisation. I think we're at the starting point of that journey. There's an awful lot more to do, but part of what the consultation is trying to do is to say there cannot be a division that somehow intelligence from statistics beats intelligence from people, and whether hard and soft, and that's just not right. And we know that's true from Winterbourne, we know that's true from mid-staff, so they have to be treated absolutely on a par and both be integral to the surveillance model. If I go to slide 4, having talked about their questions already on slide 3, I just want to dwell on that for a moment, not the whole slide in detail, but that's the overview of our new operating model, which will be common across all different care sectors, but then applied very differently for a given sector. So the style of inspection we would expect to be very different between an acute trust, for example, and a care home. But the point I just want to draw your attention to is in the big queue of CQC in the middle, where it says fundamentals of care, expected standards and high quality. If the 5 questions drive all our lines of inquiry and what we care about in regulating, those 3 levels are the levels that we will think about in terms of the action that we take. The fundamentals of care map directly to the fundamental standards that Robert Francis proposed, and for which there are examples, but only examples in the consultation, precisely because we want to co-create them with the public. But they are the absolute basics, but they do not represent what we think is acceptable care. They are significantly below what would be acceptable care. They are the basics then that anyone should expect in this country. The expected standards, which we give an example on for maternity, but again only an example on the consultation document, is where we will effectively judge the bar between what is good care and what isn't. And then the high quality bar, we work with partners such as NICE to determine what genuinely high quality and outstanding care really looks like. So we want to differentiate between those 3. If I move on then to slide 5 and our audiences, we see 6 key audiences, if you like, for our ongoing communication, and particularly the consultation: providers and professionals, stakeholders, CQC staff, the public and people who use services, the Department of Health and other government bodies, and members of Parliament and peers. All are important, but I want to just sort of draw attention to a couple of the pieces on the following slide in terms of the work that we're doing over the next 2 months. As Hilary laid out, we have over 40 staff roadshows, because it's vital that our staff understand and are part of the development of this work. We have more than 20 focus groups and workshops and one-to-one interviews with the public, 8 meetings with providers and the public. And I don't think we should underplay how much activity we will be doing with the trade associations and the Royal Colleges. And this isn't because we've somehow got captured by providers, it's because we know this has to be credible with the professionals. So you'll see in the following slides that we're doing work, for example, with the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, who have endorsed the consultation document, its direction of travel, precisely because we want the doctors as leaders in hospital environments to understand what we're trying to do. We know that they want to see more peer review, and that's something that Mike Richards in particular brings, and we will do that, but we need them on board with the philosophy of what we're trying to achieve. But that doesn't mean for a second that we tend to be captured by any provider group. I just want to lay out that we are heavily involving them in the development of the work as well. So if I look, pages 7, 8, 9 and 10 look at the timeline for what we're calling phase 1, which is over the summer and into October for some of those different groups. I don't propose to go through all of them in the board meeting, but if I can just touch on slide 8 to show what we're doing with public and stakeholders. Throughout July, there are a whole series of events, regional events, public focus events, and people who use services as you see, on the 4th of July. I'm going to ask Chris in a moment just to comment briefly. Is there anything you'd like to lay out on that? And then just to reiterate the point that we are engaging with the clinical community because we want the professions to be on board with what we're trying to do. We know there's been a credibility gap in the past. Chris?
So I think there's sort of two things to note. One is that beyond the normal advisory groups, it's the involvement in of wider groups of the public and people who use services, and particularly people who for various reasons don't normally reply to a consultation. It's our absolute determination is to make sure we involve those people, because they will help drive a better understanding of what we should do and what the outcomes look like. So alongside the advisory groups that we talked about, we're particularly focusing on ways of getting hold of people who are seldom heard. So there are a number of groups that represents, and we've got some particular workshops. We've put it in the box at the top. It's very difficult to break out. There's 100 different ways in which we'll try and do it. But alongside the normal advisory groups that we would have in this area that are very important and very useful, we do want to have local groups that will feed information back. As Hilary mentioned, we have 7 work streams of work about how we're going to change what we do as an organisation. Each of those work streams of work will have outputs that we'll ask advice from these groups, and they will be initially supporting co-production and then agreeing with the outcomes that are developed as part of that. And this is a really important phase. It determines for me, it determines part of the cultural shift in the organisation, that this is the right way to go about the development of the right standards for the organisation. It's critical, and I would say public is important. The other one that's important for me, which we haven't done very well, are frontline staff. If you think of the two groups of people who probably have most influence over the quality of care and see how the quality of care is delivered, every day. Those two groups, from alongside the others, are all important, are critical to the development of a model that works. It has to work for them.
So I don't think this is a place to have a conversation, and I welcome much of what you've said, Chris, in this slide. But I would really appreciate a more detailed conversation, because I think the key for me here is about what the objective of this activity is. And there's a very big difference between getting people's views, and I applaud your efforts to get to people who wouldn't normally respond, but there's still a big distance between getting people's views about propositions which have been developed, even if very green propositions, and inviting people to do what I count as co-create, which is start from the beginning without a proposition and help to develop a proposition. So I'm quite keen to understand where on the spectrum this various different bits of this work are, and to contribute and be helpful if I possibly can be, as it's something that obviously is kind of part of my lifeblood. So,
Steve, go
on. Can I just build on Anna's contribution, because I think this looks excellent, and it ticks all the boxes that we as a board might be concerned about. But this will be the consultation on the way we exercise ratings for these institutions. And I think, isn't it?
For Acute Trust, that's right.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So what matters, I think, for us as a board is that the consultation is actually legally tight and won't be found at fault subsequently when people get upset by their ratings, as some inevitably will. And we've seen it already that some institutions might resort to judicial reviews, and the area they will target will be the consultation, and they'll claim it is flawed. And we will look very stupid, as the NHS has on several occasions, when some of its consultations have been shown to be flawed in litigation. And I just want that assurance that what we do is absolutely tight and ticks all the relevant boxes for that particular part of the process.
Can I just, so I'm clear, what the point that Anna was making, as I see it, and you, Steve, I think the co-creation argument is particularly powerful around the fundamental standards, because the whole point that Robert Francis was making is to have real traction around those fundamental standards. People have got to feel that they have actually, to use your word, co-created them or developed them together jointly, or however you want to express it. And I think, as I understand it, Paul, the 8 commandments, as we have they're now being dubbed, that are in the consultation, they are illustrative. So I don't think they're not designed to subvert that process. I mean, Steve is at the other end of the spectrum, in a sense, to make sure that the consultation programme sort of formally complies with what is the correct sort of process. And of course, the ratings is a part of the fundamental standards, ratings, and the inspection process are the 3 sort of parts of the consultation, aren't they? But on the ratings, and on the surveillance metrics, we've had to set out, I think, what they are, or what we propose they will be, in order to get a proper sort of debate from providers. Would that be correct?
That's right. There are some areas where we are under statutory obligation to consult, or the Department of Health is, and that's predominantly where things will be laid out in secondary legislation, and there will be further consultation specifically on those. What we've absolutely tried to is go well beyond any sort of basic legal requirement on consultation. As my understanding, there is no formal requirement if we choose to change our operating model to lay that out, but we want to be transparent in that, and to confirm your point, those fundamental standards or fundamentals of care are absolutely illustrative only, and we certainly weren't the first people to put illustrations in the public domain. Francis did so himself.
And on Steve's point, the committee, which is considering the care bill, will meet on the 3rd of July, and it's planned that they'll discuss the ratings propositions there, because we need primary legislation to give us the power to rate, and then on that basis there'll be some further consultation required on the rating. So I think what we're doing is we're giving an early indication on a range of our proposals in this consultation document, but as I think Paul said in his introduction, there'll be follow-up consultations that will be required, and I think it's that we can actually answer your question with some confidence that we will have had a proposal which is able to withstand any subsequent legal challenge on process, and we can set that out quite carefully. So I think this is indicating the direction of travel we're moving in ratings, how the inspections will relate to ratings rather than into the kind of slightly more technical, mechanical analysis of how the rating will operate, and we will do some further work on that to provide reassurance.
David, I strongly support the move both to ratings and from the 28 regulations to the 5 key questions. I want to make that clear at the outset. What I'm interested in, though, is whether any modelling has been done as to the likely ratings that would be accorded to particular institutions, organisations, compared with what we get at the moment in terms of the compliance stroke non-compliance status. Are we going to get more reds and fewer greens, or more greens and fewer reds? I mean, I'm not quite sure what this is going to look like when it's finished.
Can I just ask that, because I think we had to move on a bit on time. I mean, we have a list at the moment.
That was a precursor question. There's a later question, but I'm happy to raise this elsewhere if you're running out of time.
No. I think it's a good question, and I want to answer it in two parts, if I can. At the moment, we have a list, a worry list, don't we, that we see in private, and we have it in private because we are not confident that that list is as evidence-based as it should be, of hospitals that we worry about. We will have, before the end of the year, a list in which we do have confidence, and it will be evidence-based. And that we envisage that list will be published. Now, we don't know how many hospitals will be on that list, which I think was probably behind your point, whether it's 10, 20 or 30, we don't know that. So that's one part of it. The second part is, when we come to the ratings, I mean, interestingly, when we met with Ofsted, 9% of schools are rated outstanding, which gives you an idea of how many. It may not be 9%, it may be 12% or 5%, but it's quite a small number hospitals will be sort of green, glowing green. The vast majority of them will be in that good. What's the third category that we have? Good.
Requires improvement.
Good requires improvement. Yeah, because satisfactory by definition is not satisfactory, and so therefore requires improvement. But we won't. Although we'll have done the surveillance stuff, and we'll have our worry list definitely by the end of the year, we will not complete the complete ratings of all hospitals for 2 years, 2.5 years.
We're doing the modelling on how quickly we can do it.
Okay, so we won't have the full ratings of all hospitals for, well, until we don't know yet, but we are longer.
I said that was a precursor question because at the moment, if you look at the various cohorts of organisations which are inspected, usually between a quarter and a third or even more fail on the present tests. Now, if that bar is low, which is the description here, then presumably, if we make the bar higher, that failure rate is going to increase to beyond a third, to 50+%. So my question my question about modelling was whether we think that is actually what's going to happen or not. And given that we don't know the answer to that because the modelling hasn't yet been done, whether we will have the resources to be able to cope with the processes needed to deal with that level of what we call non-compliance or inadequate or requiring improvement status.
On the resources point, because I agree, I think that we will have large numbers of organisations who are inadequate or requires improvement. On the resourcing point, we are carrying out the modelling on, and to today's point, how quickly we can get through the programme for acute hospitals, but doing it correctly. That modelling includes follow-ups as a result of finding inadequacies of care, to give assurance on that. The way we've laid it out in the document says that a hospital cannot be outstanding if there are any fundamentals of care breaches. That's for consultation. That is a very difficult thing for a hospital to read, and I fully expect hospitals to say, well, how can anybody be outstanding? But I think in the light of the Francis report, that is exactly the question we have to throw open. Similarly, you cannot be good if there are fundamentals of care breaches or if they're not rare occurrences and acted on quickly. So for those two reasons, if no others, I'm not expecting to see the majority of hospitals being good or outstanding, but it's a conversation we need to have with providers about what's acceptable to the public.
Have you come to the end or not quite?
I've come to the end of this.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Paul. Winterbourne View is you as well. Update.
Yeah, sorry about that. But can I ask Bernadette Hanny to join us?
Chair, just at this stage, I ought to declare that if there are any questions that people, I know it's not in the report, but if there are any questions people want to ask about the legal action being undertaken by Liberty, I ought to leave the meeting. No, which is on the council.
So with apologies to the board that I don't have the full coverage yet 1 month in on all the areas that I've asked Bernadette to join us. Bernadette's acting regional director, who's done a great deal of the work in the wake of Winterbourne View and the Panorama programme. So Bernadette, if you could take us through the paper.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'll just correct that. I'm quality manager. I was acting regional director at the time the issues of Winterbourne came to light. And then I went on to lead the inspections of the 150. So that's my background in this, and Alan asked me to come today. The purpose of the paper is really for information for any comments that you have. But I just wanted to point out two important factors, in as much as failure to deliver on these actions does have a risk for people with learning disabilities that poor care could be perpetuated. So there's a significant risk if we fail to deliver, and equally a reputational risk for CQC. I just wanted to point out those two things first. I mean, as you were aware, the issues at Winterbourne View came to light in May 2011, and at that time the normal safeguarding processes were put into place, which included review by the South Gloucestershire Adult Safeguarding Board, who commissioned a serious case review. That wasn't then published until the 7th of August 2012, mainly because of the prosecutions that were in place. It couldn't be published until all those had gone through the process. And the set of recommendations from the serious case review covers the full spectrum of care, commissioning, providing, etc. Now, some of the recommendations, as it says in the paper, were set out so that delivery of those recommendations isn't always within CQC's gift. So what the paper is updating on is really the issues that are within our gift. We have made good progress on many of those, but the paper comes with the caveat that there is still some more work to be done. As you've had a chance to review the paper already, I wasn't going to go through each of the actions, but just wanted to take the reds and the ambers, and I'm happy to take questions on any of the others if you so wish. Having listened to the conversation you've just had, there's two areas that are red, one red and one amber, relating to the care of people with mental health problems. And I think that you just talking about the strategy and the consultation and new ways of inspecting, etc., will cover some of this off. So that should proceed as we go through with new ways of inspecting and regulating services. So I wasn't going to say too much on that. One of the ones I did want to focus on was the action from the serious case review panel that the CQC should take appropriate enforcement action where registered managers are not in place, and you'll note that that is still in red in the risk rating. Now, the absence of a registered manager does increase the risk of poor performance. There's quite a bit of work on Winterbourne View being one of the examples of where not having a registered manager can lead to poor performance. So they are on the inspector sort of risk alert list. What we haven't done as an organisation is really use those enforcement powers historically. Now, wherever a location requires a registered manager, we do impose a condition. There are some circumstances, for example, where a service is owned by an individual and they are in day-to-day management. They don't have to have a registered manager, although we can impose a condition. So where we have imposed a condition for a registered manager, it is actually an offence to carry on the regulated activity without a registered manager in place. One of the difficulties of that is evidencing that the organisation hasn't taken appropriate action to fill that post. So in as much as, if somebody leaves, they've got to have time to recruit, the recruitment might be unsuccessful, and that's led to some obstacles in the past. However, this is in recognition that this is not something that can continue. There is a specific project group looking at this at the moment, and they're looking at two arms of it. One is about information for providers, about registered managers, their qualifications, experience, etc. And the other is actually about what we as CQC should do about that. And whereas I've just mentioned that there is a sort of acceptable times where somebody may be making all efforts to recruit a registered manager and failing, we are looking at services that have not had a registered manager for a significant amount of time first, and actually looking at what sort of action we can take that. And that's a project that's going on at the moment, which is why it's still red, but is moving at quite a pace. The other item that's amber on these actions is about taking inspections are carried out by sector specialists and experts by experience. An increasing number of our inspections do now include experts by experience, but it is something that we wish to see more of, and again that's covered in the consultation that's out now and the new way of inspecting. We would expect the inspectors to be specialised and more involvement of experts. Those are the main things, and overall with the strategy and plans for registration, we talked earlier about the holding directors to account for quality will help to ensure that the programme that we've signed up to helps us deliver our commitments to Winterbourne View's serious case review. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks for the update. We seem to have fallen into the usual trap in that we've said that when we've referred to the mental health arm, we've omitted to realise that it's actually our monitoring of the Mental Health Act that's crucial here. And of course our Mental Health Act commissioners are going into these places on a fairly regular basis. And in fact one of the issues I think with the Winterbourne case was that there was this disconnect between our Mental Health Act commissioners and the sort of general inspection regime. So it seems to me that here we don't seem to have bridged that gap. So it's not simply about monitoring mental health services, it's about our Mental Health Act commissioners going in regularly and that information being fed into our sort of general sort of inspection framework.
I think that's a very fair comment, and certainly we have a memorandum of understanding between operations compliance inspectors and our Mental Health Act Commissioner colleagues, and I think we are seeing more of joint inspection work going on, but I think you have got a very valid point that it's not lots.
I mean, is it happening? I mean, how do we make sure that stuff that's picked up on the Mental Health Act commissioners or our SOADs actually gets to where it should be in the organisation? Because, you know, that was so crucial to this. And, you know,
There is going to be an audit of compliance inspectors, compliance managers' knowledge of the memorandum of understanding. So that will actually hopefully pick up if there's any weaknesses that need to be addressed to improve that, because it's a key issue, as you say. Yes, sorry, I should have said them. Yes, I apologise.
It's interesting that you refer to a memorandum of understanding. I mean, these are people all within our organisation, aren't we? I mean, why do we need a memorandum of understanding? Why don't we just tell people to do it? I mean, I mean that seriously. I mean,
let me take it away. Chair, I think the truth is on Winterbourne, everybody missed what was going on, including Mental Health Act commissioners. So, well,
sorry, can I? There are two reports into Winterbourne View. There was an internal review carried out by CQC staff, which made a number of recommendations, one of which is the point that Kay has been making about the need for SOADs who are in these establishments to be able to link in with the basic regulatory activity and make sure that that doesn't get lost. And I'm a bit worried that we still don't seem to have cracked that, because I thought when we discussed this last time, that was being sorted. But obviously it hasn't yet been sorted, certainly to my satisfaction, and I suspect other board members. And I do think we need some, to use the word that was being used earlier on, pace about this. Then there is the serious case review, which is what's the foundation of this particular document. And I have to say, I don't understand why we are separating these two documents. It was one serious incident which went wrong. We've got a number of actions arising from two reports. I don't understand why we can't have an integrated schedule of what we agreed to do in the light of those two reports and whether they have been done or not. So that's the first proposition, which David might want to pick up in a minute when he comes in. The second issue is that I do have concerns about what is here. One of them is already been highlighted, which is that the Care Quality Commission, this is on page 4, Care Quality Commission should take appropriate enforcement action where registered managers are not in place. I think we've been over-sympathetic and over-generous about this. I don't quite understand why we aren't taking enforcement action. I don't understand why this is red. It doesn't seem to me to be a particularly difficult issue to do. The CAA would not tolerate for one moment aeroplanes taking off without qualified pilots in them. I don't see why we are tolerating institutions which are being run without people who are registered in charge of them. If officials feel that there should be a more tolerant approach to this, then I think there is an obligation to come and seek strategic guidance on that and let the board take responsibility for not implementing it. I don't think this is a matter for officials to make their own judgments about whether we should be more tolerant than is recommended in the in the serious case review. The third, the second point I wanted to make was about the first recommendation, which was about these institutions requiring frequent, more thorough, unannounced inspections. And what I'm not clear about is whether that is what we are actually doing. Although there's a green rating, the narrative next to it says that where we identify regulatory concerns, we inspect services more frequently. That was not what was recommended. What was recommended was that we should automatically inspect these services more frequently and more thoroughly. And I don't understand whether we are or aren't doing that. And I think I'd be grateful if we could have an answer on that. The third point I was going to raise has already been discussed. It was on the CQC must encourage whistleblowers to raise the alarm. And what is described in the narrative next to the green rating is that we now have a more efficient system for receiving whistleblowing alerts, not that we've done anything about encouraging people to find it easier to whistleblow. So I'm not, on the basis of the narrative here, I'm not convinced that this is green, but it's linked to the discussion we had on the previous item. Sorry to be difficult, Chair, but I think that it would be helpful if we could have an answer to some of these questions.
I'll do some. My apologies, Kay and John, if I've missed the report. I clearly have. I was going on the Winterbourne case review. So what I will personally give an undertaking to do, we will bring back to the next meeting a clear statement in relation to and a combined action plan which draws together what happened in CQC and the Winterbourne case review report. And we'll deal with the actions that follow that, as you've indicated. So let me just give agreement to doing that, John and Kay. On registered managers, I think your point is absolutely right. We discussed this last week and I asked for further work to be done on this so we could be absolutely clear. I think one of the issues that we need to be clear about that we'll try and walk through in the advice to the board so you can actually give a steer is we know there is a proportion of vacancies at registered managers. I think this is why Bernadette is saying one of the judgments we need to make is legitimate and appropriate action being taken, to use one of the phrases, at pace to fill these vacancies, or are people genuinely doing it for whatever reason to reduce costs, to manage it, etc., etc. And we need to take a judgment on that, but we'll draw that through. And I think on your challenges about more thorough, we'll just be clearer with you, John, about what it is that we are doing on inspections. I think Bernadette will be able to describe some of the work that we're doing currently on that. But we'll set that out in the note more fully than here. And on your point about not how many whistleblowers have we had, but how are we encouraging whistleblowers, we'll come back to you on that as well.
Anna? Well, I've got a question for information, and then I'd like to, armed with that, say that's an inappropriate use of the term, isn't it? But anyway, with that information, I would then perhaps like to say something else. But can you tell me how many institutions are we talking about that we are applying this this approach to? How many such hospitals are there?
I'd have to go away with the exact figure, but there lies in an interesting issue. When we did the inspections, the 150, and it does say in here about one of the actions is about assessment and treatment centres, and one of the problems that we had was identifying which locations were providing assessment and treatment services, which links into a conversation you had earlier about the statement of purpose and our services actually providing what they set out to provide. So actually we had quite a challenging time. I could go away and find you the exact figure, but I'm afraid I can't remember it off the top of my head. But I have got it.
Okay, well, understood, although it's constantly a source of surprise to me that we can't kind of lay our hands around these sort of numbers and know what the scale of the task is. But so I feel less close to this than colleagues who've kind of lived and breathed it a bit more. But so reading this quite cold, I have to say that it left me concerned in the ways, in various ways that other people have talked about, left me feeling that actually we hadn't yet done what we needed to do, in short, in response to Winterbourne View. And I'm very clear that the strategy does provide us with a means for addressing some of these issues, but it's also the case that the strategy doesn't plan to move into this space in terms of our approach to inspection being radically different until 2014-15, and that will be the beginning of that process, which will take some time to come through the system. And so, and I have to say that I'm not sure that therefore that the strategy will address some of these issues is an explanation that I feel comfortable with, because I think. Given, I mean, I was hoping to hear a slightly smaller number, but it seems to me that maybe we need to really focus our effort on those places which are sort of major providers of service in this space, and just make sure that we've done everything necessary. These are a particularly vulnerable group of consumers, and I think we have a very strong responsibility to make sure that we've learned and implemented the lessons in those biggest providers at the very least very quickly, and before we implement all the changes in the strategy.
I've recently started sitting on mental health review tribunals, and I've already picked up a couple of examples that I've been able to refer to CQC. It seems to me that these tribunal members are going in and the doctor goes on the ward and interviews clients, and I just wonder whether there's something that we could develop, I don't know, a memorandum of understanding, because they're actually there and you hear some concerning things. So I think just thinking of getting intelligence, I'm not sure that's something that we've actually accessed, and I think it would be really good if we could, actually.
Just on Anna's point, I think the strategy deals exclusively with the issue about changing the registration process, not the other issues that are flagged in this action plan, which are either amber, red or green rated. So in a sense, I don't think the vehicle for taking action on these recommendations. I can't speak for the internal CQC one. I will go away and look at that, but take the action. So I don't think we're investing everything in the strategies to do this. I do give the commitment that we will come back and be absolutely unambiguously clear about where we are against the actions in both reports. But we're not, in a sense, all the action is not in the strategy. What we have done is we've signed a concordat where the recommendations that were made in the serious case review, or that the Minister and other colleagues wanted us to commit to, we've actually laid out what we've committed. We've laid out there our commitments, and that is what I think we need to account to you as board members on, as well as the things that have previously been committed that John and Kay have raised, and that's what we'll go away and we'll come back to you.
Can I just add one thing before that? You want to come back in, Bernadette, but I mean, my real concern is we still don't have enough specialist inspectors. And it comes back to the point Kay was making at the beginning about using Mental Health Act commissioners as well, but we don't have enough specialist inspectors going into these places. I mean, it's a question rather than a statement, but I believe that we don't. And how can you possibly inspect a place like Winterbourne View if you're not someone who's out of that kind of environment?
Can I answer that in two ways? If I just take John's point first, I think one of the things I probably didn't explain is at the time of the issues coming to arise at Winterbourne View, and just before that, the inspection regime was very different from the one we had there. So some providers may not, under that regime, if they were meeting the relevant standards in place at the time, might not have had an inspection for between 3 and 5 years. And since then, we brought in the annual inspections. So the inspections did increase in response mainly to the issues at Winterbourne View. So I think that I probably didn't, explain that well enough. So I'd just like to give you some reassurance that those inspections have increased. They are all unannounced. We are going back to follow up where we're finding concerns. So the frequency now to 3 years ago is a very different picture in the positive way. So I didn't think perhaps I'd made that clear.
I'm more about the quality of the inspection.
And I'll come to that.
Okay.
Equally, I believe the learning disability, the 150 inspections, all included a team of people, because the inspectors weren't necessarily experts in the field of learning disability, but what they had with them was a professional advisor. So they had somebody that was an expert in that field, and they had experts by experience, usually a person who'd used services and a carer. So they had a different number of perspectives, and that's what we're taking forward, really, that we may have inspectors going in that don't have a background in learning disabilities, but where that is, we'd be expecting them to take in somebody that was, be it a professional advisor, be it a mental health act commissioner, colleague.
So expecting, the word expecting, it should be mandatory.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have someone on the team who knows what to look for and knows the look and the feel of how it should be, the inspection is not a proper. I mean, my concern is this whole issue around fault assurance. We do an inspection, and people think, therefore, it's fine. Then you dig underneath it, you find the inspection was done by people who don't know anything about it. I mean, that is my real worry. It's all our worries, I think, particularly after what just happened in, the Grant Thornton report. But it's been our worry for a long time. I mean, can you say categorically that no inspections take place now without an expert, whether that's a specialist or whether that's an expert, patient by experience type expert?
To answer that, the 100% calculation has to go.
Well, I think we need to know these things, David. Don't you agree?
I do, Chair. And I don't want to be an apologist or make any excuses for this. I think this is the trajectory we're moving in. I think, as Bernadetta said, the 150 that are referred to here, which was the immediate follow-up, did contain experts on each one, experts by experience and carers. This is the direction we are moving in, and we'll do that. I think one of the issues from this conversation that we need to reflect on is how can I report to you as part of the regular monitoring that gives you some confidence of just what the proportion of all of our inspections are that include experts and experts by experience, etc. I've said all of that without the microphone, as the man at the back has just. So what I'm saying, Chair, is let me take that away. I do agree with you. The issue is about pace and trajectory. I think in all the 150, we did have experts by experience, experts on these groups. And let us see if we can find a way of reporting to you the proportion of all of our inspections as we make this transition over the next 2 to 3 years that actually are where our inspection teams are constituted in that way as we make the transition. And we'll take that away and look at how best we can do
that. I think in the acute hospital sector, I think we've crossed the Rubicon of accepting that our current inspection model is inadequate and broken, and we've started saying that. But I think for the purpose, we're saying that we need to be healthily sceptical in all our inspections. That's a better way to be. And we're also saying that we should apply the same discipline to our own organisation as we do to those that we inspect and regulate. So it seems a reasonable proposition that as we go sector by sector over the next 3 years, taking the most vulnerable sectors as early as we can, we apply that skepticism and assume our model is wrong until we know better, rather than assuming that it could be okay. So I think that's one of the tests that we need to apply as we're going through the further consultations, not to assume things are okay.
Can I just pick up John's point about the registered managers not being present? I'm not really very happy with the link to the Concordat and the absence, because whatever we do to improve the number of registered managers there are, unless they change the recruitment model so that there are, whether there's locums or something else available, there will always be gaps. And I don't think that's acceptable. And I think what we should be saying is that there should be a different model for registered managers' staffing arrangements, so that if one goes, there is a team of locums or temporary or I don't know what that go in. And that is got to be the provider's responsibility, and we've got to insist on it. But, just wait 6 months while we recruit someone, and guess what, that might go wrong, I don't think is adequate.
think in principle it's very hard to disagree with that. I don't know what the practicality. I don't know. Are these very small? Are some of these sort of 2-3 resident type homes where? I don't know enough about the sort of the sector.
I think there's a huge variety, to be honest, between the very small and the much larger. So it would be difficult to respond to that.
How are we going to? Because there's a genuine concern. I mean, you can see the concern. Paul?
I would make the point that one of the 5 questions is whether it's well led or not. We're going to inspect whether or not it's well led. If it doesn't have a registered manager, how can we say it's well led? So I think that's hard.
At all.
No, I mean, Bernadette was making the point, though, if someone leaves or has a baby or something like that, I mean, if it's a very small home, there may not be sufficient staffing to have someone to fill in. Is that the point you were making?
I think that it's not. They'll often have somebody to fill in, but then that person that's filling in may not be registered with us. So there'll nearly always be a manager covering, but that manager won't be registered with us, and that's one of the issues that we need to pursue.
I mean, presumably, if as part of our consultation, this is something we will ask the industry as well, is it? But the presumption has to be there must be a registered manager, hasn't it? That must be the presumption. I suppose it is rebuttable in certain exceptional circumstances.
That should be the exception, not the norm. And what worries me is that there's a published regulation about what is required, which is the written expectation, and then there is the unwritten expectation of the way that we then enforce that. And what we're actually doing is saying, oh, don't worry, if you can't actually get a registered manager, don't worry, we won't take enforcement action. That's the message we're actually giving. And I'm very unhappy about that message. The message should be, I'm terribly sorry, if your registered manager is leaving, you'll need to find another registered manager by the time that person leaves. That's the condition for operating. And I think we've got to be rather tougher about some of these regulations.
The thrust of the last sentence in the link to Concordat is that we're getting involved in supply. That isn't our job.
Look, you've got the gist. We're all coming from the same place. There's got to be a really strong reason to depart from an absolute blanket rule. A really strong reason. Will you take that away? We must keep this Winterbourne View on the right up on the radar screen, David. I think it's such a vulnerable area.
Chair, I've absolutely got the message. We'll spell that out. I'll work with Bernadette and other colleagues to make sure that for the next meeting there's a report in front of you that combines the internal action with this action. You've given a very clear steer this afternoon. This does cover some of the discussion that took place at the executive team, but I'll make sure that it's unambiguously presented, and that the issues that I think these last 3 points that have been made about the role of registered managers and what it is that we should be looking, irrespective of what others are doing in terms of supply, training, etc., etc. We can put to you some propositions about what our operating practices should be in respect to registered managers. I have to say, it's not just here. This goes across all homes, and we'll get a letter out to you this evening which tells you the number of homes. I think it's in the small thousands, but I'm reluctant. The small thousands, but I'm reluctant to give a figure because I'm just not confident I've got it properly. But if you think there's 20,000 adult social care locations registered, around 12,000 of those are older people services, then the rest are split between mental health that are registered, learning disabilities and physical disability. And what I can't do is just give you that breakdown of the others. So let us just remove that from the meeting, and I'll cause a letter to go to every board member this evening that says what those precise proportions are, just to get the manageability of this. But let me take it away and bring it back, David. We've got the anxiety that's in the room.
Okay, thank you.
This item is the head of operational improvement, and this, to introduce briefly, is to look at the follow-up action that's taken place as a result of our 3 thematic inspections from 12-13, and what's happened to those providers who are non-compliant.
So this report sets out the follow-up action that's been taken in relation to inspections for the 3 themed inspection programmes that happened in 2012-13. So first of all, just to state that from those 3 different programmes, there were a total of 11 locations where the level of non-compliance with the regulation was such that it was having a major impact on the people using the service. So warning notices were issued straight away for those, and the further inspections on those found that there had been improvements to the point of compliance for 8 of them, and at 2 locations some improvements have been made, but the level of concern was still minor, so they will be followed up further, and 1 service cancelled their registration. Moving on to the others, how it's split is by the 3 different programmes, and the graphs show how many of the locations inspected weren't complying with the regulations, the number who have had a follow-up inspection to date, and of those, the number that had achieved compliance with the regulations by the time that re-inspection happened. And after each graph, there's 4 pieces of information. So the numbers that received a follow-up, the number of the remaining ones that are scheduled to receive a follow-up, and the timing of those inspections will depend upon the nature of the issue identified, what the timescales were for putting it right, and the level of impact on the people using the service. And what the outcome was in terms of whether compliance with the regulations had been reached, and where it hadn't, where there was continuing lack of compliance with regulations, what action was taken. And that same pattern is followed going through for the 3 different programmes, broken down by region and then the total nationally. And this is part of a commitment that we've given that we will always look some months afterwards, 6-month period afterwards, to see what action's been taken following themed inspection.
Paul, did you want to comment any further on that?
The only point I make is that the level of assurance we can take from this is that the proportion of follow-ups, because these are themed inspections, we should not feel confident that therefore everybody who could be non-compliant is being followed up. That's the fundamental challenge of themed inspection. That's the other point I draw out.
If people don't have comments on this, I'm pleased to see this follow up. But I wanted to say something about the point that Paul was raising, because we do these themed inspections to get a feel for what's happening across in an area, and we do it on a basis which we anticipate allows us to say something more general about the proportions of compliance and sort of across a much bigger sector, I mean, this may have to be on the wish list given the number of things that we have to do, but it seems to me that there's it's imperative that we follow up on those people we identify who are non-compliant. That has to be a kind of, must have. But given that in many of these themed inspections, we find actually there are not insignificant issues across the sector, it seems to me there's a second thing which we need to do, which is think about what tools and techniques do we have available to us to do something to use that information to improve standards across the whole of the sector or in that particular area of delivery. And I'm not necessarily talking there about inspections, wholesale inspections, although sometimes one might decide that actually in the next year there will be, if you like, a flavour of all inspections, which is they will focus on some of the things we've identified as issues as a result of a themed inspection approach. But we might equally want to run events and provide good practice and do all sorts of other things with the sector to try and make sure that the lessons learnt from the theme inspection are really learnt across the sector and there's a general improvement. So it's dealing with the ones we found, but doing something about the kind of the sector as a whole. And I'd be really keen for us to get to that place, though, as I say, I think it may have to be on a bit of a wish list.
So the themed inspection split into two types. There's from 12-13, there was the dignity and nutrition ones that are an example of a particular, a manifestation of poor care, versus the ones that are on domiciliary care, which is just an entire sector. On the first of those two, I think it's symptomatic of the problem that we've had and got until we changed the model, that you need to do a themed inspection for something as basic as dignity and nutrition. And so one way that I think we move it off the wish list and just make it mainstream business is the sorts of things that we would had to in the past use thematic inspections for are just mainstream business for us. And that's certainly part of caring and being responsive. And if we're not looking at dignity and nutrition, both of which are examples on the fundamentals of care, then something's gone wrong with our new model. So I think that's part of the other. I mean, the thing I think slightly shocking is the proportions of people that are non-compliant. So it's over a third on both of the dignity and nutrition sides, and I think that just it's easy just to forget the scale of the challenge that we've got.
I absolutely take that point, and I think that's very much the direction that we're going with themed inspection. Certainly with these reports, we took a significant step forward in that we used the reports to publicise what we saw as being good practice. So working, encouraging people to improve. And we worked with trade associations, etc., to actually highlight that. Moving forward, of course, priority 4 of the strategy is about progressing the way in which we do that themed inspection work and using it as a tool in which we can encourage improvement. We're certainly looking at reporting that much more upfront, and we may want to think about how we link in more widely to the sector. And the other element of that is we've also talked with Christina Cornwall about the ability we have maybe to evaluate that wider impact on the sector. So when we do issue a national report, is it making other people talk about what's happening in their organisation, even if they weren't a part of the, the actual review itself?
So is it also true that as we go forwards, I mean, one of the potential weaknesses of our new structure is that it could be seen as a silos. And actually we want to look at the journey of patients through the health and social care system or through mental health into acute care and back, those sorts of issues. And that themed inspections will give us a way of following the patient journey. If you take the frail elderly with chronic long-term conditions, for example, how they move into acute care, emergency services, back into the community again, that we'll use themed inspections to look at that.
Yes, so. But I think that's only one of the ways that we should do it. So we shouldn't become reliant that thematic inspections are the way we tackle the whole patient journey. They're one tool in our kit, but I think we need to develop more.
I think the other thing is then it's how you make sure that topics are picked that link with that. And I think board has already picked 2 topics as the initial work this year, that is around the transition of children into adult services and dementia, both of which are absolutely right as topics to be able to do it, that sort of pathway approach rather than being purely focused on particular parts of particular sectors.
Not also looking at mental health, people who come with mental health problems who come into acute hospitals. Didn't we agree with Norman Lamb to look at that?
We did. And it will go on the programme, but that needs working up. We did agree to look at that. We agreed to take that away and work that through. I think what Sue's referring to are the 2 that you've already agreed as a board, and I think Sue's leading that work, and I think is well on with the design so that they can be given action in the next period. We will pick that up, David. You're right. We have agreed it. Yeah.
Sorry, I know you want to move on. I take Paul's point about the level of non-compliance, and that is alarming. But for me, what is even more alarming is that they do it again. What I mean, we either need more sanctions or something, because if a proportion of them can get it right, what's stopping the others? Right?
Yeah. But the point is well made that it's something like 3/4 are compliant on follow-up, so 1/4 aren't. So what is it we need to do differently? That's part of our legal duty, is to promote improvement. So we've got to take it away.
The question is what they need to do differently, not what we need to do differently.
Can I come back on that? I don't think it's either or, actually, in fairness, John. If we're not putting in place the incentives, it doesn't matter to people, then I think legitimately we do need to look at what we're doing differently. But yes, the responsibility is with the provider board.
Sue, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. It's 1:05. Shall we just do the next 2 items, and then I think then we can stop the filming and have a break? Are you happy to do that? Paul.
So this is about the state of care report, which Chris is going to talk about in a bit of detail. It'll come out after summer recess, so either in September or very early October. And the point about bringing it here is so that we're not saying this is what's going to be in it. We're asking for views. We have some thoughts on what should be in it. This is not the first time we've run it. I think the third time, Chris, we've run it. And it is a landmark document for the CQC. This is our opportunity to set out, it says what is the state of care. So it's very important that we get that right. Chris.
Thanks, Paul. The key messages for this, for the board today, sort of fit into sort of 3 areas. I think we spoke about it before in terms of the build of the state of care, but apart from our inspection information, it's built on a number of different tiers. So there's information which comes from stakeholders, the Information Commission being one of the key ones. Informed conversations with our staff on emerging themes, informed conversations from stakeholders on emerging themes, and then we take all of that to build hypothesis and to begin to bring our thoughts back here. One of the reasons for bringing this conversation today to the board was to sort of, one of our ambitions in this is that we wanted to try and get a document that was more timely, that fitted better with the financial year from which the information represents. One of the building blocks of that is that stakeholder information which comes from other sources. There are some we think critically important pieces of information that just aren't available. Until I put it as one of the appendices, some of the key pieces of information. So the complaints information for the last 12 months, the information on HCAI infections, cause of death information on the ONC. There are really some really chunky and important pieces of data that will come out to us in order to begin some analysis during this month. I don't think you can do it without that. I think it's really important that you have that information, you have that data to make an informed picture, to begin the conversations with yourselves, with staff, with other stakeholders. So what we're saying today in this document is that we need to have that information to begin that work. What I then want to bring back are, from that initial conversation I've described with the tiers, are some early themes that we said we'd do. So we go away and we have that initial analysis, come back with some early themes about these are the things that we think are issues for each of the sectors. We already have got some from the work we did on some intelligence colleagues and colleagues in operations did on the links between A&E attendance. You may remember in the care update that we did earlier in the year, we talked a bit about the linkage between problems of people getting into and out of A&E as a consequence of their performance. We're looking already at some linkages that sort of link the care pathway from adult social care into secondary care and back out again, to see what the relationship is like between performance in the secondary care environment and the adult social care environment that links to it, because I think that will be an important piece of work. But what I wanted to come here today was of an offer to say, I think it's important we have that data to begin that conversation. What I wanted to bring back to you was some early themes that we could then have a conversation at a board with the analysis. The analysis that I'm talking about is basically coming in by the end of the most of it comes in by the end of this month, effectively. So I'll have the most of the information to do that analysis. We'd bring therefore back a themed conversation, and as Paul said, we'd aim to publish the state of care around about the second week of October, bearing in mind Parliament's when Parliament's sitting. So that was really the sort of tenor of the discussion today.
Well, just to say, I'm sure you know, Chris, but other board members may not, that that you are planning to publish. We will be publishing the Healthwatch England annual report to Parliament on the in that first week in October. Yeah. So it just good to make sure that we're properly tied in, and I'm sure you.
Absolutely. We remember we spoke about it, I think, 1 or 2 meetings ago, because when you first talked about it. I think there's a lot of logic between trying to get coordination about those messages. So our ambition, and this is basically, I think the 8th is when, from memory, is when Parliament's back. And I think that's the date effectively that we could work out whether it's better to do one than the other, or whether we link them in some way.
I think we're committed. We've got a parliamentary reception on the 9th, which is when the day of our launch. So just
that's fine.
To know.
That's
yeah.
fine. Okay.
So, but on the specific proposal for this in-depth review. Just a couple of comments, really. I mean, I suppose it depends where we think we want to go with this. But for me, the question might be a bit broader, because I'm not sure it's just about residential care. I think it may also be about domiciliary care. I mean, there's something about whether or not people are able to be cared for in an appropriate location, home or residential care, rather than finding themselves in hospital, being arguably the inappropriate location for their needs. So I'd encourage you to think about broadening it. And the other thing is that I don't think this talks about a link between admissions and the quality of adult social care. And I don't think it is just about the quality of adult social care. I think it's also about the accessibility. So again, I'd encourage you to kind of slightly expand the scope.
Can I just come back to, I think I entirely agree with both those points. So it will focus on the whole of adult social care. I described it in this paper that went to ET, it's described as residential care. We will focus on domiciliary care and care homes with and without nursing. And on the point of access that we have got, we'll look at the registration information which sits around that as well, to see what's the relationship between access and quality and the performance. So yes, you're absolutely right to mention those two areas.
Well, it's partly about registration, but there's also a question about affordability. Actually, and that will become an issue going forward. So there may be something about what people, what consumers and users of those care services experience is of access, and what the barriers to access might be, which may be that they don't know their way around the system and who to go to and how to get what they need. It may be that there's an affordability. Anyway, there'll be a number of issues, but I think it's not just about whether or not there are enough places in the system, but also about whether or not people know how to access them.
Slightly different point. Later in the agenda, there's the first report from the National Information Governance Committee, and one of our responsibilities is to publish a report. Now, we've only had one meeting, so we're not drafting that, but we are getting to the stage where we will probably bring a recommendation to this board, because we don't make decisions, about how that report should be published. And I just wanted to put that on the sort of executive team's agenda as to whether it should be included in this or in other reports rather than as a separate document, because I think that has not been decided, as far as I know.
It's not been decided. Sorry, Ken.
One of the point I was going to raise is that CQC publishes 2 reports. It publishes the state of care, which is a sort of commentary on health and social care, but it also produces an annual report, which is about what we've done in our performance. And I wasn't sure, for example, if the Healthwatch report was more akin to our annual report or our state of care. It is, so it's different. So when you talk about an annual report, it's different from our annual report. And I think it probably links into Steve's point in that I don't know whether that would go into the state of care or the annual report, but it's the annual report, yeah. So it's about, obviously being clear. I mean, there can be an overlap, but yeah, okay.
Kez just made the point that I was going to make. I think we just need to distinguish between our commentary on the system that we regulate, where we pull out the key themes and activity and trends that are taking place, and that analysis informs what we do in the following year, coming in terms of that work, as distinct for the reporting to Parliament to which we account. And I think this afternoon we've got a further report, which is our draft annual report, which I think we're looking to report to Parliament in July of this year, just to draw out those distinctions. I think the points that were made about what we can report on in terms of analysis of activity are well made, and as Chris said, we'll take those away and look at them.
I just want to be clear. So the report that we'll be sending to Parliament at the beginning of October is not a governance report of Healthwatch England's arrangements. It is a substantial, I hope, contribution to understanding. Yeah.
So Nigel Thompson's joining us for this item. Nigel's the head of user involvement at CQC. This is a paper where we're asking for board approval, and it's something we've debated over April and May in the executive team, and have asked for a number of revisions too. I think it plays heavily to earlier agenda items about the consultation, that we make sure that we really are using or listening to the voice of users and co-designing with users of services in everything we do. So, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. A statement of involvement is a statutory responsibility for us to publish a statement of how we involve and engage people in our work. So that's how we involve people to use services in all features of our work, and also how we listen to and take into account the experiences of people who use services. It builds on the work we're already doing, which is around the Experts by Experience programme, Speak Out Network, Equality of Voices, and all the mechanisms we have in place to listen to people in relation to our inspection activity. This statement is a revised statement. We committed at the beginning of CQC to revise the statement. The delivery of this statement was deferred following the completion of the strategy review, and it takes into account a number of responses to that review from people who use services about the things that CQC should be doing. The statement itself was written with people who use services, so it reflects to a large extent their views and about the way in which we should deliver our business. Interesting enough too, a very clear theme from that was we must have a statement of involvement which makes clear commitments and promises, but also one that's achievable, one that actually where we are able to actually deliver on what we say, and I hope that the statement again reflects that. The statement also reflects the recommendations of the Mid-Staffordshire Inquiry and also the government response to that. And it is very much centres around a range of our work about how we involve patients, families, carers and local communities, patient experience listening to people who use services, also how we listen to those people whose voices are weakest in the system, how we can ensure that we're picking those voices up, and also about committing us to make a direct connection to people who use services, to carers, families and local communities. And it sets out a promise really to work in equal partnership with people who use services.
I'm feeling repetitive, but I really like some of what's in here, and I think I see some enormous strength in and sort of development of what we're doing in terms of involving the public. I'm talking about consumers and users in the intelligence work and around inspections, and even some around culture change and training. And I think those are all great. I think the thing that I'm not quite as persuaded of yet in this statement is of the way in which we will involve consumers and users in CQC's own policy and implementation of its policy in the kind of broader sense. So I'm back in the space of the consultation and fundamental standards and those kinds of things. And I think it will be very important that we are clear that we have ways of doing that. and at the moment I think it hangs quite heavily in this document on the panel made up of people who use services from diverse communities as a kind of way of sounding board for some of those things. So I just don't get that from this yet as it stands.
Okay, thanks, Anna. In fact, actually, we do that already. We have a whole range of, in terms of the way in which we develop our methodology and policy currently, we do engage a wide range of people who use services in that work. We have, and in fact, for example, the developing work around the fundamental standards of care, we're already in discussion about how we're going to involve and engage people who use services in that work. I think you've made the point about the panel. Certainly, that's an important issue for us going forward, and we welcome the board's views on how we take that forward, because certainly in terms of the Francis recommendations, it quite particularly talks, doesn't it, there about a people's consultative council that is able to inform the board about the views and experiences of people who use services in their work. So that certainly is an element going forward. But currently, we do have a number of mechanisms in place where we're involving people on our ongoing work, and I'm certainly happy to relook at that to see that if we've not really emphasised that enough.
How many people do we have working with us on inspection teams who are users by experience?
Sorry, we currently work with 4 support organisations, and we have a range of people who use services, people with mental health issues, people with learning disabilities, carers, people with dementia, a whole range of up to about 350 people at this moment in time. We're in discussion with currently about re-procuring that contract that we have, and with a view to the expansion, or the expected expansion of the need for experts by experience going forward. Our soundings currently are that it's feasible, that we would confident that we could.
It doesn't sound very many to me. I mean, I thought you were going to say something 10 times that amount. It just didn't feel like very many. I mean, a hospital will have 500 to 1,000 volunteers on its books. I mean,
you're right, and we'll need more. And for taking hospital inspections as the first thing that will change, we'll get more.
I mean, I would have thought a lot of people would love to do it. I would have thought.
We already had the office number. I know Age UK, for example,
yeah,
have offered to expand the programme.
Okay, thanks.
David, one quick question. Who else does this in a way that we really admire? I mean, who's better at it than we are?
In terms of involving and engaging people generally, I've no idea, John.
Could we try and find out?
We certainly we're in discussions. For example, I was with NHS England yesterday talking to people that carry out a similar function to us. For example, we also talked to Monitor. We talked to a range of people across the sector, and all of them there are a number of people that have, in particular areas. There's certainly areas which I think we certainly think we could learn from. But generally speaking, is there someone that's doing everything well? I don't know.
There's nothing I object to in this paper. It's all very, it's all fine. But I just wonder whether it's enough, and I think we ought to be doing much more. And one of the, the competitive instinct is a good way of trying to find out what more we could try and develop, or try and copy other people's ideas, or even invent new ideas. Let's be a bit bolder.
I think it's such a good question, John, and sparing John's blushes, but actually one of the organisations that the public and stakeholder organisations think did this particularly well was the Food Standards Agency. Certainly in its early inception, I don't know how it has been latterly, and another one is Ofcom. So 2 people in regulatory space, of course, neither of them in health and social care, where I'm not sure that we have done it as well as we have in other sectors. So certainly would be, I'm sure, informative to go and have some conversations with those 2, if not others.
finish off the rest of the agenda and then we can go and worry about reconvening the film. Is there, oh, right, okay.
Well, there's quite a lot.
We can be very brief.
Shall we be very brief? Okay. All right, item 13. John, all signed.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a paper really asking the board for retrospective approval for the registration of GPs, the tranche 5 as we called it, business case. It's taken to the board for approval because of the sums involved. The capital is over 5 million and the overall spend is over 10 million pounds. The paper itself sets out the background to this. An original business case was actually approved by the Department of Health in January 2012 and by Cabinet Office in May 2012, and the total cost of the submitted case was 7.5 million. Now, one of the difficulties that we had here with the registration business case was identifying, and this is quite common actually, and we see this in a number of areas across CQC and indeed the public sector, identifying benefits as well as the total costs. And as we went through the registration process for GPs, looking at the online aspect of registration, the original business case was set up in a way that we had envisaged online services for all registration processes to be made available to all providers. Clearly, there was more work involved in that than we envisaged at the time. We decided then to go down a different route on online services. We are now using the G-Cloud methodology rather than doing a lot of the development ourselves, which was going to cost more money. So, following discussions with the department, we agreed that we would submit a further business case in the future in respect of the online services and refresh the business case for GP and primary medical services providers. There were a number of other things that transpired over the last 12 months where we did a lot of compliance improvement work. At the time, we had, with our operational colleagues, we regarded that work as effectively business as usual work, so it was not included in a business case that got approval by the Department of Health. So we took the view that it was much better to revisit the business case for GP registration. We will put forward at a later date a new business case for online services. And we included the costs of the compliance improvement work in this business case. And the consequences of all of that are noted in Annex B, actually, which there's a reconciliation here of the total costs and revenue and the benefits and the NPVs that the two business cases give us. The top line shows the original business case with an NPV of 12.8 million. Because we included a lot of benefits in that original case, which now we're saying are more properly and more appropriately reflected in an online services business case to be submitted at a later date, because it wasn't really attributable. Some of the benefits that we put in the business case, even though it was approved by the Department and Cabinet Office, we considered that they weren't really attributable to the registration of GPs. So they should come out. And you'll see in the benefits the costs. We've put in additional costs of about additional benefits for compliance improvement, which weren't in any business case at the time. It's not exactly, I have to say to the board, this is not where we want to be. There were so many unknowns in terms of the registration program at the time. The benefits were difficult to identify. And some of the costs, as I've said, around the compliance improvement work that was done a year earlier, weren't included in a business case. So what we've taken the view here that This more properly reflects the GP registration and the registration process, and that a new business case will come forward to the board and the Department of Health for online services. So this reduces the NPV in this particular instance, but some of the benefits of 20 million that we've excluded here will flow through into the online business case that we're working up at the moment. So what I'm asking the board for here is retrospective approval. This has gone through the Department of Health process, by the way. We've taken the department through the stages of this, and they have given their approval to this business case and agreed that some of the benefits should go forward into a further business case to be submitted later. So this has all been approved by the DH. I haven't attached the business case here. It runs, the detailed business case itself runs to about 60 pages that the department have approved. I can make it available to the board if anyone wants that level of detail, but I'm asking the board to give retrospective approval to the costs as a required board approval for that level of expenditure.
This emerged from the audit, and
Microphone, John.
This start again. This emerged from the audit, and we were briefed on this by the external auditors. This is clearly the appropriate way of handling it, and I think we should approve it.
Thank you.
I'll make it just an adjacent point. We are normally quite careful, but in this report, I still should know, but don't know what PMS stands for. And I did work out what T5 stands for. Yeah. If we could just make sure that all the abbreviations are identified at least once in a report, it would be very helpful for public documents.
Indeed, point taken. Steve will do, point taken. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Anna, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I said GPs.
You've received a report. I've subsequently also handed out a document which gives you more information about what Healthwatch have been up to for the last 3 months, but that's really for background. If you've any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Chair, could I just say on the ARAC report that there are some very serious points made in this report about our approach to risk, and in particular, you would see in paragraph 3.1 that the committee regrets that we're unable to give the board the level of assurance which we would like to, and which we believe the board should be able to expect. The reasons for that are, I'm afraid, well known to you and are implicit in the recommendations and changes in the regulatory model and in the operation and culture of the organisation. But this report, I know David has taken a considerable interest in it, and I hope it will inform the work that he and you and colleagues in the organisation are doing over the next few months.
John chairs ARAC, David, and I'm a regular attender at ARAC, and we considered this at the last meeting, and it will inform the work we're doing in terms of changing the governance. I think we've touched on it on 2 or 3 of the items we've looked at today around delegations, at what level decisions are made, etc., and it comes to this. I think the key issue here is us being able to demonstrate by what we do that we're actually taking these things forward. So I think this is not about whether we've got the right policies in place, but it's about whether we're demonstrating that we're actually delivering them. And I think that's the challenge that we've got alongside the others that we've talked about today. But I am committed to taking it forward, Chair.
Nothing to add to the document and the papers. Any questions? Or Steve, have you got anything on the governance?
Got off to a good start, and we're very well supported by the officer team, and we've through to the new officer from the member of the committee.
Okay.
Any other business? Did we cover all the action points in the last meeting? I think they've all been covered
On the minutes, yes, sorry. I did mention this to David beforehand, and I thought we would be doing stuff before the main report, so I said I wouldn't mention it. But on page 3 of the minutes, there are 2 actions, and I don't know, I certainly haven't seen anything of either of those. One was about Oxford Brookes University, and one was about the thematic review.
We had okay. Claire, would you like to just deal with the Oxford Brookes one first, because you've got that now, haven't you?
Yeah, that will be circulated later today. Sorry, it was a little bit late.
No, it doesn't say by the next meeting.
So.
And then on the thematic review, Steve, what was
yes,
it?
the last line on page 3, and I've raised this with David, and he said he's going to deal with that.
Waiting time, on waiting times.
I think there's confusion on my behalf, Chair, and I will actually address that, and Naomi and myself will make sure Steve gets a letter that just lays it out. I think the worry was that we weren't taking something forward, and we are indeed taking it forward, but let me clarify that and let me accept responsibility.
Right. I think that concludes the public part of the meeting. We have got a little bit more to do after lunch. Should we break for half an hour? Yeah? Thank you.